This page is the front cover, classic N64 Magazine style. Big bold lettering, lots going on. Right at the top it's shouting about being the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo magazine. Must have been doing well back then. There's a chance to win a PC, printer and software, worth a fair bit too, £1,350. Not bad. And look, they've managed to snag an interview with Miyamoto himself, Shigsy as they call him, chatting about the upcoming GameCube, the Game Boy Advance, and even him playing the banjo, which is a bit random. The main image is all Pokemon. Ash, Misty, and a bunch of Pokemon like Pikachu and Squirtle, promoting Pokemon Puzzle League. That was a decent puzzle game if you were into that sort of thing, a bit of a Tetris Attack spin-off for the Pokemon crowd. The big feature game is Rush 2049. The future of racing has arrived. It says, bit dramatic, it was alright, futuristic racer. Not as good as F-Zero X in my book, but still fun. Then you've got the latest shots section, teasing previews or smaller bits on Mega Man 64, which was a solid 3D Mega Man adventure. The World Is Not Enough, probably the Bond game, WWF No Mercy, the wrestling game everyone went mad for, and Star Wars Battle for Naboo, another Star Wars game tie-in. And down at the bottom, a big feature on Game Boy and Warlocked, getting the world's first review apparently. They were really pushing the Game Boy stuff back then, even on the N64 mag cover. And finally, a look! Banner mentioning a free Mario Sports special inside. Gotta love a freebie. Classic cover, it's all there, N64, Game Boy, Pokemon, bit of everything to grab your attention. This page is the welcome page for issue 48 of N64 Magazine, dated December 2000. Right off the bat, it's declaring itself Britain's biggest and best-selling independent Nintendo mag, which was a bold claim, but they were pretty popular back then. It's boasting 116 pages, promising loads of content. They're making a big deal about getting their news from proper sources in Europe, Japan and America, not just nicking stuff off the internet, which was a thing people were starting to do more of back then, naturally. They're saying they're independent from Nintendo, so they can give honest reviews, which is what you want to hear, isn't it? Tututi. There's a section about the GameCube. Remember all the fuss about that before it came out? Apparently they got some early reactions after Nintendo's Space World show, and people were a bit unsure about the look of the console, comparing the controller to a Fisher-Price toy. Bit harsh, maybe? They even had a chat with Shigeru Miyamoto himself about it all, which is quite a coup. Looking at what's inside this issue, they've got a Shigsy interview, that's Miyamoto obviously, a review of San Francisco Rush 2049, which was a decent arcade racer on the N64. Pokemon Puzzle League is also featured, because you couldn't escape Pokemon back then, could you? There's a Planet Game Boy section, covering the handheld side of things, and latest shots previews including Mega Man 64 felt a bit different in 3D, didn't it? The World Is Not Enough, a Bond game tie-in, WWF No Mercy, the wrestling game everyone loved, and Star Wars Battle for Naboo, cashing in on that episode 1 hype. And lastly, they're giving away bumper prizes worth over £1,000, which always catches your eye. The next issue is out on Monday the 20th of November, slightly in the past given this is December, so maybe a bit late for this issue to be hitting shelves. This page is the contents page for N64 Magazine issue 48 from December 2000. Right at the top we've got the big contents title, hard to miss that one. Then it breaks down the magazine into sections. First up is Planet 64, starting on page 12. That's your news section. It mentions New Desk with the latest GameCube gossip, which was a big deal back then as we were all wondering what Nintendo was cooking up next after the 64. There's also something about a new Pokemon club. Pokemon was still absolutely massive at this point, so no surprise there. Then under Coming Soon, they are teasing a few games. Carnivale, Battle for Naboo, likely Star Wars Episode 1 tie-in game, and WWF No Mercy. No Mercy was the wrestling game everyone was hyped for. Those AKI engine games were something else. Proper grapples and all that. Moving on to N64 Arena, page 48. This is the UK releases and review section. They're highlighting San Francisco Rush 2049, which was a really fast arcade racer, looked pretty slick at the time, and Hercules, the legendary Journeys game, which was probably alright for fans of the TV show. Can't say I was rushing out to get that one myself. Then there's Import Arena on page 60, covering Japanese and American games. They've got Pokemon Puzzle League, another one for the Pokemon fanatics, this one a puzzle game, and MS Pac-Man Maze Madness, which, well, it's Pac-Man but in 3D. Can't go wrong with Pac-Man, I suppose. Sorry. Lastly, we have the regulars section, information station, for charts and release dates and all that info. A mention of N64 Magazine issue 49 coming soon for Christmas, and N64 inches for horoscopes and Zelda and Friends. And tucked down the bottom is Planet Game Boy featuring Warlocked, a real-time strategy game on the handheld. Seems like they were trying to push the Game Boy Advance a bit even before it properly launched. And that's your lot, the contents of this issue. This page is the contents page of the magazine. In it? Right then, what have we got in store this month? Looks like a future look section kicking things off on page 6, promising a first look at the big N64 games coming, with a picture from The World Is Not Enough game, the Bond one. Then there's Mega Man 64, with amazing new shots on page 10. Always liked Mega Man, proper classic that. Then we have the Club 64 Feet section, the reader service bit, starting on page 67. Mailbox is on page 68, always good to see if your letter got in, wasn't it? How-to section is about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion on page 72, with a big scary dinosaur on the cover. That game was pretty intense back then, proper dinosaur hunting action. Tips Extra is on page 78, top tips for the N64's top 10 titles, always handy for cheating your way through a tough bit. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is on page 83, for sorting out your gaming ills, whatever they might be. Game On with new challenges on page 86, I'm the Best to Prove Yourself on page 88, and Skill Club Millennium, that was the club for the hardcore players, on page 92. Directory on page 96 for looking at games before buy-in, and back issues and subscriptions on page 106 if you missed an issue, or wanted to get it delivered, easy peasy. Over to the right side, there's Pokemon Puzzle League on page 60, claiming to be the N64's best puzzler. Had Ash and Pikachu on there. Proper colourful game that, good for a quick blast. Then, a special interrogation with Shigeru Miyamoto, the big man himself, that's on page 30, talking about GameCube, GBA, and the N64. That would have been a good read, finding out what he was thinking about the next-gen consoles at the time. Finally, On the Record on page 108, music inspired by Ninty Games, with a picture of the Zelda, Ocarina of Time soundtrack CD. Good tunes in those games, always were. And that's your lot for this issue, all wrapped up on page 5 of the December 2000 edition. This page from issue 48 of N64 Magazine is all about The World Is Not Enough, the new Bond game on the N64. It's a first look feature, and about time too. We've been waiting for a decent shooter since, well, GoldenEye really. They're calling it a supersized look at Bond's new N64 mission, Cheeky Blighters. The info burst box tells us it's from EA/Euro.com, on a 256 megabit cart, supports 1 to 4 players, and yes to all the packs, except the transfer pack, naturally. Release dates are November for the US, December for us Brits, and TBA for Japan. 4 out of 5 anticipation ratings, not bad at all. Yes, Aggie. There are some screenshots, showing typical Bond stuff, shooting blokes in corridors, using X-ray goggles, shooting posters in the underground. Looks like your standard FPS fare but with a Bond skin slapped on top. They're highlighting ducking for cover and shooting posters, riveting gameplay features right there. Also, a little blurb about Mega Man 64 Feet, with latest shots of the blue-clad laser-toting hero. 10 out of 10 apparently, must be good then. And a quick mention to check out the Coming Soon section on page 20 for more new games. Standard magazine fare really. This page is taking a look at The World Is Not Enough, on the N64. Right then, what have we got here? Looks like they're showcasing some of the gameplay. They're pointing out you can expect to lose your weapon going through doorways, which is a bit cheeky, isn't it? Hang gliders are apparently a nightmare to shoot down, which sounds like fun. Warrington doorways, or controller smashing frustration. Ah, the laser watch makes an appearance. Classic Bond gadgetry. They're saying it cuts through metal, good stuff. Helicopters looking rather flashy thanks to the Twine engine. Apparently it's something special for future games. They're making a big deal about how much it's like GoldenEye, saying if you remember Perfect Dark's hovercraft battles you'll feel right at home. Bit obvious innit? Rare gave up the Bond license so Eurocom could have a crack. They reckon Eurocom have refined the GoldenEye formula, and they're really going for it with this TWINE engine. First-person shooting and shadowy stealth? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? GoldenEye 2 in all but name, as they put it. They're even mentioning a shootout on top of a plane like Die Hard 2. Without Bruce Willis of course, unsurprisingly. They are hyping it up to be even more successful than Rare's masterpiece. Strong words, let's see if it lives up to it. Gigantic levels and sparkling visuals, that's the promise. December 2000, so this was building up to Christmas that year. Right, let's move on. This page showcases Blasted Bond, reckoning it might just be a multiplayer experience to rival GoldenEye. Ambitious claim that is, eh? It's got sections detailing different aspects of the game. Cast mentions the characters you can play as, classic Bond characters we all know, like 007 himself, Christmas Jones, and even the villains Oddjob and Trevelyan. Sides explains you choose to be good or evil, and that affects character behavior in some way. Apparently Bond and M can't be on the same team, bit obvious isn't it? Guns section notes there's a good range of weapons, like GoldenEye, and highlights a rocket launcher, because of course there is. What Bond game is complete without a rocket launcher? Bots section is about computer-controlled players, meaning you can fill up the 4 player slots with AI, and each character having unique playing styles and health handicaps. That's a nice touch. Maps mentions over 20 levels, including claustrophobic castles, massive mines, and even a battle on top of a plane. Sounds like a proper action-packed affair. Games section covers game modes, saying it includes favorites like King of the Hill and Last Man Standing with limited lives. And finally gadgets, mentioning Q has packed Bond's rucksack with gadgets. There's a list of them: camera, phone tap, safecracker, data scrambler, x-ray glasses, standard spy fare really, and the text below explains the phone tap gadget can broadcast conversations to MI6. The bottom right corner shows a screenshot of the ski level with icy caves and echoes for gunfire. Sounds atmospheric enough. Overall, it's pitching blasted Bond as a serious contender to GoldenEye, packed with features, variety in levels, characters and gadgets. Whether it actually lives up to that claim, well, remains to be seen, doesn't it? This page is all about the upcoming Bond game, The World Is Not Enough, on the N64. Visually they're saying it's really something, even good enough to rival GoldenEye. Bit of a claim that, isn't it? They reckon the levels are gorgeous and gigantic, putting GoldenEye to shame. Bit strong that, but alright, let's see. They mention the attention to detail in the MI6 building, like phones and notepads on desks, and even reflective floors, saying it's up to rare standards. High praise indeed. They're going on about how everything feels right, from Bond's walking speed to the gun sights. GoldenEye's veterans will feel at home apparently, and little details like Bond twisting silencers onto pistols and fire extinguishers on the walls are getting a mention. There's a bit saying character interaction is much better than in that Turok 3, which, let's be honest, wasn't exactly setting the world alight, was it? Then there's a section titled Down the Tube, focusing on a London underground level. Apparently it's set after Bond crashes his speedboat. They talk about hordes of baddies, hostages to rescue, and the level being really detailed, with ticket barriers, escalators, adverts, and even the station announcer voice saying about pickpockets. Amazing is the word they use. There are screenshots dotted around, one with a chap in a suit looking very Bond-like, and game screens showing different bits of action. Captions pointing out things like chatting to people in the game, which is new, and photographing evidence, saying it's not all just shooting, there's some cerebral stuff too. And they're even pointing out the escalators actually move and bring guards towards you. Fancy that? Overall, they seem pretty impressed with The World Is Not Enough, saying it's shaping up to be a proper Bond game and something to look forward to in just over a month's time, December 2000 it says here. This page is a future look at Mega Man 64, or Mega Man Legends as it was known in the States. It's calling it a classic update, which is a bit much, isn't it? Still, it's Mega Man in 3D for the first time, so that was quite something back then. They're saying the chunky 3D graphics are actually a good thing, lending it a sparse but beautifully stylized feel, whatever that means. They say it's a direct port of the PlayStation game, released last year, which is true, but they're trying to big it up as something special. The article mentions the story is about finding the truth about Mega Man's parents, and this motherlode, a mysterious family treasure. Sounds a bit cheesy, but it's Mega Man, so you kind of expect that. There are screenshots showing the gameplay, looks like running around towns and shooting robots. Classic Mega Man really, just in 3D. They mention frantic running and jumping, and some RPG elements thrown in too, like adventuring and exploration. Control should be tighter than the PlayStation version thanks to the N64's analog stick, which is definitely a plus. The PlayStation controller's D-pad was never ideal for that kind of movement. They are saying control is better for strafing and targeting, all good things for a shooter. The info burst bit at the bottom left gives us the lowdown. 128 megabit cart size, single player only, and it uses the controller pack but not the expansion, rumble or transfer packs. It was slated for January release in the US and TBA for the UK and Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red dots, so they're clearly quite looking forward to it. All in all, looks like a solid enough update for Mega Man fans. This page is a future look at Mega Man 64, or Mega Man Legends as it was called over in Japan. Seems like they are talking about some of the game's features, like gem collecting, which, well, every game seemed to have that sort of thing back then. They're saying the robotic bosses are common as muck, and mentioning some tough training areas. Apparently there's a time attack mode that's been expanded to different cities, which might be a bit of alright. They are promising loads of secrets to find and calling it a classic Capcom shooter. We'll have to see if it is any good when they get round to reviewing it properly. It's dated December 2000, so it's still a bit off. This page is from the news desk section of N64 Magazine, and the main headline is, "We are the champions," proclaiming that the nation's finest GoldenEye player has been found. It's all about the UK Console Championships final for GoldenEye at the Live 2000 show in Earl's Court. Apparently, this Richard Barrington Hill bloke from Stourbridge polished off the competition. He sounds like he was pretty dedicated to Bond, missing deadlines just to play in local heats. He ended up winning a cool £1,000, and they even had one of the gladiators, Saracen, handing over the oversized check in the photo. Classic bit of 2000s cheese that. The article talks about how competitive gaming was getting bigger, mentioning the GameCube on the horizon and the future of online play. It's funny to think GoldenEye was the big competitive game back then. Proper nail-biting stuff in one-on-one matches. They even gave the champ a brand new paperweight, lavished upon him no less. Seems a bit of a naff prize after winning but hey, a paperweight is a paperweight. This page in N64 Magazine is all about GameCube gossip. Seems like they are really pushing the hype for Nintendo's next console. It's been a couple of months since they first showed off the GameCube, and Nintendo are officially calling it NGC for short. They've even put out some pictures to show how small the controllers and discs are compared to the N64. Blimey, they are tiny. Apparently there will be 5 proper Nintendo games ready on day 1 for the Cube, which is good news. And get this, Nintendo and Sega, those old rivals, are working together on an RPG. Who would have thought that would ever happen? Peter Main from Nintendo of America is quoted saying the GameCube will be the most technically advanced console ever. They're throwing about names like Mario, Donkey Kong, Pokemon, Link, and even Sonic and Virtua Fighter from Sega. Sounds like they are going big. They mentioned something happening at E3, and an announcement in November. Oh, and the Game Boy Advance gets a mention too. In the shortcuts section, they're talking about Nintendo using dodgy internet stuff for advertising, like those Blair Witch films, and pointing to a couple of weird websites, zscience.com and radiozelda.com. Then there's some nonsense about strange happenings and anagrams, something about the One and DNA Online. Typical magazine filler, I suppose. And then Crash! Konami have bought Crash Bandicoots, Sony's old mascot. Apparently there might be Crash games on GameCube and even Xbox, which is a bit weird considering he was Sony's guy. They're telling us to restrain your joy about that, cheeky sods. There's also the N64 Tips helpline, with a number you can ring if you're stuck on games like Pokemon Snap, Mario Party 2, Turok 3, Perfect Dark, Donkey Kong 64, Zelda Ocarina of Time, Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye 007 and Banjo-Kazooie, and loads more apparently. Costs £1.50 a minute to call though, mind you. Looks like they are pushing all the big hitters on that list. And there's a picture of the purple GameCube, a white N64 controller next to a purple GameCube one, to show the size difference, and Link from Zelda, looking very heroic. Oh, and some shoes at the bottom, no idea why they're there, maybe Paul's toxic shoes or something. This page is all about new merchandise, bits and bobs for gamers. First up we have the Wake You alarm clock, a peculiar looking thing, shaped like a wheel. Apparently you can record your own wake-up call, which is a novelty I suppose for £15 . Then there's the Transposer 6, described as a variation on the Rubik's Cube, another puzzle to frustrate you no end. They reckon it has over 16 million combinations. Sounds like torture to me. Moving on, there's a Doraemon wind-up toy, imported from Japan. Doraemon, bit of a strange blue cat robot thing. He bashes cymbals when you wind him up. Next is the Pocket Hello Kitty, another Japanese import, a little pink Tamagotchi-style toy with Hello Kitty on it. They reckon it's cute and that, and you can play tennis on it apparently. Right next to that, the horny N64 official controller, also from Japan. They are saying it's like the original N64 controller but smaller and maybe not as good. Bit of a weird one, especially the placement of the Z trigger button. Torika. And finally, there's my very first Game Boy book, featuring Mario. It's a puzzle book for preschoolers with Mario and Bowser on the cover. They're saying it's a good way to introduce youngsters to Super Mario. Shigsy's finest they call it. Referring to Miyamoto I presume. A bit cheeky. Lastly, there's a competition to win a Pocket Hello Kitty. You have to answer a question about Akihabara in Tokyo, asking what it's known for. Cuisine, electronics or where Shigsy lives, which is a bit of a daft option. Electronic goods is the obvious answer there. Send your answer on a postcard to the magazine address before November 24th. This page kicks off with a bit about Amazon. Seems they're branching out into selling PC games online, which is hardly groundbreaking stuff, but fair play to them for getting into the market. They're selling N64 and Game Boy titles too, which is more interesting for us lot. They reckon their prices are decent and they've got sections divided by genre. Standard online shop stuff really. Then there's a piece on Evil Game Frenzy, some American report about mature content games and retailers being urged not to sell them to kids. Seems like a bit of an overreaction as usual, but it mentions Perfect Dark, so clearly they're worried about proper games there. It's all a bit, watch out for the youngsters scaremongering really. The main chunk of the page is called Retro World, a cat and a bat from yesteryear. Nostalgia trip time. It's talking about retro games, proper old school stuff. First up is Hello Kitty for the Game Boy, described as a platformer from 1992. They're saying it was a bit middling and probably not as successful over here as in Japan. Apparently some feminists had a go at it for its lack of feminine looks, which is a bit much, even for the time. They call it a cultural creation from Sanrio, and say it's had varying degrees of success over here, compared to Pokemon being a massive hit, and Doraemon not doing so well. Sounds about right. Next up is Arkanoid. Now that's a proper classic. Imagine 1986, Pong, Breakout, Throg the Wall, all those Batanball games. They say Arkanoid was a high-tech, futuristic reinvention of the wheel, which is a bit strong, but it was good for its time. Blocks that needed multiple hits, power-ups, juggling 3 balls, all good stuff. Programmed by Mike Lamb, who they also mention as the Excitebike 64 Supremo, bit of a legend actually. They say it's an achievement akin to carving a polar bear from a grain of salt, getting it on the 48K spectrum. Bit dramatic, but yeah, it was impressive back then. They even mention there were 2 sequels and co-op fun in the original. Good times. This page is from the Nintendo World Pokemon Club section, styled up like a newspaper called the Celadon Times. The big news is some lad from the UK, Darren Van Vuren from Essex, has won the Pokemon World Championships. Apparently it was in Sydney at the Dome, must have been around the time of the Olympics in September. He beat a German guy, Kevin Krause. They even got Minoru Arakawa, the head of Nintendo of America, to comment something about everyone understanding Pokemon, regardless of language. Sounds a bit much, but it's good news for the Brits, I suppose. Down below, they're banging on about Pokemania making a comeback with Pokemon Gold and Silver for the Game Boy Color. They're saying pre-orders are already massive, like 600,000 already, and Nintendo are aiming for 10 million sales. They're really pushing Pichu as the new cute face of Pokemon. It's all dated December 2000, so this is all happening right now. This page is all about Pokemon new goods, basically a roundup of all the Pokemon stuff you could get your hands on back then. Borrington. First up, we've got a Pikachu pajama case from Golden Bear Products for £16.99. They're saying it's a rosy-cheeked Wonder Mouse, and it's fluffy and good for carrying your gym jams. Apparently this is the third in the Pika-themed cases, which sounds about right. They did love Pikachu. It got a 92% rating, so pretty good for a pajama case, I suppose. Warrington, no? Next, the Pokemon 2001 calendar from Danilo, costing £6.99. Okay, a calendar. It's got pictures of Ash, Misty, Brock, and Pikachu. You know, the usual suspects. They reckon it's ace, and features seriously scary attacking poses, which is maybe pushing it for a calendar, but whatever. This one got 80%, not bad for knowing what day it is, or Warsus. Then, we've got Pokemon Jelly Lollipops, from Crazy Concepts and Tesco, 55p each. Jelly lollipops, can't go wrong with them, especially sugar-coated and fruity. They reckon these are top-notch Poké Sweeties, and taste light, full-bodied with a fruity palate attack. Bit much for a lollipop description, but hey, it got 85%, must be decent lollies then. Moving on, a Pokemon pop-up play tent by Worlds Apart, for £29.99. A Pikachu emblazoned igloo, as they call it. They're a bit sarcastic about who'd want one, but say it's probably a good present for young'uns. Got a 72% rating, maybe a bit flimsy or something. Then there's Pokemon, the first movie video from Warner Home Video, £15.99. Oh, come on. They say if you don't know about this film you need a good slapping. Bit harsh. It was a big deal though, the Monster Summer Smash. They reckon you should buy it again even if you've seen it. Got a solid 90%, it was pretty popular. Finally, there's a Pikachu foam bath from Grosvenor, for £4.99. They are laying it on thick with the sarcasm here. This isn't particularly bad, but to be honest, they say. It's a plastic Pikachu with foam bath inside its butt. Amusing, maybe, but they think it's going to be a bit much in the office. 70% rating, probably best to give this one a miss, unless you're really hardcore Pikachu fan. Warrington Yoffe. Oh, and at the bottom there's a competition to win a Pokemon movie doormat. You just need to answer what Daniryu is in English from Gold and Silver. The options are Yamikarasu, Ariadosu, and Meriipu. Bit of a niche question for a doormat, innit? You had to send your answers on a postcard to some address in Bath before the 24th of November. Good luck if you're trying to enter now. This page is previewing Carnivale, a new game coming to the N64 from Vatical. It's being touted as based on a movie, apparently dreamt up by some bloke who's mates with Tim Burton, a clown called Senzo, which sounds a bit strange if you ask me. Anyway, it's a kart racer, set in a spooky theme park. The screenshots show some karting action, what looks like a strength-testing minigame, a bit of duck shooting, and the entrance to Carnivale itself. Bizarrely, they're saying Helena Bonham Carter and Hugh Laurie might be doing voices for it, which is a strange mix, isn't it? The info burst box there tells us it's a 128 megabit kart, 1 or 2 players, needs a controller puck and rumble puck, but no expansion or transfer pucks. Looks like the US is getting it on December 5th, but no dates for us, in the UK or Japan yet, just TBA. Anticipation rating is 3 out of 5 red dots, so not exactly setting the world on fire then. The article mentions the hero is supposed to be a bit of a wimp, and they're worried about the 90-degree turns on the tracks being a right pain. They are comparing it to Rocket and Mario Kart, you know the score. And they're saying don't bank on seeing this movie in the UK, mind. The Q&A bit at the top explains the movie plot is about kids stuck in a spooky park, and if they don't get out, they'll be frozen forever. Right then. This page features Star Wars Battle for Naboo for the N64. It's flagged as new pics, so this is probably hot off the press for this magazine. The article kicks off by saying Factor 5, who did the original Battle for Naboo game, are back with this sequel on the GameCube. Bit confusing as this page is clearly about the N64 version, maybe they were showing off both at the time? Anyway, it's set on Naboo rather than Tatooine and stars Gavin Sykes instead of Luke Skywalker, but it's essentially Rogue Squadron Part 2 feat in terms of gameplay but based on the Episode 1 era. The reviewer mentions a good variety of vehicles and missions, from aquatic craft to assaults on enemy bases. Graphically they admit it doesn't look hugely different from Rogue Squadron, but highlights improvements like real-time lighting and fogging being sorted out. There's a Q&A section that covers speed, which they say is faster than Rogue Squadron, and the difficulty, which apparently dynamically adjusts based on how well you're doing. Bit handholdy perhaps, but maybe welcome for younger players. There's a little info burst box that gives the key details. It's from Nintendo, a 128 megabits cartridge, 1 player, expansion pack and rumble pack compatible, transfer pack not needed. Release dates are listed as November for the US and December for the UK. The anticipation rating is 4 red dots and a green one, so pretty hyped then. Screenshots show various vehicles and environments, including what looks like a landspeeder with a Wookiee. Or is it just a really hairy chap? And a Naboo starfighter. One screenshot mentions not needing a Halifax code to access the starfighter this time around, which is a bit of an in-joke referring to obscure cheats in games back then. This page is all about upcoming games, focusing on 2 titles for the N64. First up we have a preview of Donald Duck, Quack Attack, which as the name suggests, stars the famous Disney duck. It seems to be a platformer in the vein of Tarzan on the N64, with Donald strutting through levels, walloping enemies with his flappy feet and collecting things. They mention the controls are forgiving, which is probably a good thing for a Donald Duck game. Apparently when he gets hit, Donald goes into a bit of a tantrum, becoming invincible for a short time, which sounds quite funny. The supporting characters mentioned are Daisy Duck, Murloc the Magician and Huey, Louie and Dewey. The game's slated for release in November. Below that we have a preview of Spider-Man on the N64. This one's developed by Neversoft, who were known for Tony Hawk's skateboarding at the time, which is a bit of an odd choice for a Spider-Man game, but they say it's similar to the PlayStation version. It mentions web-slinging and wall-crawling as you'd expect, and even Peter Parker's spider-sense. They name-drop a few villains like Scorpion, Rhino and Venom, and familiar faces like Black Cat, Daredevil, J. Jonah Jameson and Mary Jane Watson will also appear. The reviewer jokes about the similarity to Shadow Man rather than Superman, which I guess means it's a bit darker or grittier than you might expect for a superhero game back then, but hopefully, it's still good fun. This one's also down for a November release. This page has got a preview of Batman of the Future for the N64, which was based on the cartoon series obviously. They're saying it's a sideways scrolling beat-em-up, nothing too fancy looks-wise, but they reckon there's some surprises in store. Apparently, Batman gets to choose from 4 different power suits at the start of each level: standard, nimble, defensive and offensive, each changing up how you play. They mention flailing nunchucks and batarangs, so it sounds like your typical Batman gadgetry is present and correct. There's a little Q&A bit where they joke about 100% character recognition when you fight robots, which is a bit of a dig, and they also touch on Bruce Wayne being an older mentor figure in this version. Below that, there's a section called Info Burst, giving you the techie details on the game like it's 128 megabits, 1 or 2 players, and uses the controller pack and rumble pack, but not the expansion pack or transfer pack. It says it's out in December, which would have been Christmas time back then. Then the rest of the page is mostly an advert for Wicked Ware, a games retailer. They're pushing Pokemon Snap and a limited edition Pikachu N64 console, which I remember being quite sought after. Loads of N64 and Game Boy games are listed, with prices you could pick up Pokemon Snap for about £38 and the Pikachu N64 for about £85. They've got a load of Pokemon games and merchandise listed too, trading cards and stuff, plus Game Boy Color bundles. At the bottom there's another little advert for soft character toys Nintendo beanies, saying they are so cute. It's just your typical games magazine page from back then, previews and ads all crammed in together. This page delves into WWF No Mercy on the N64, and blimey, were we all waiting for this one back in the day. THQ were the kings of wrestling games on the N64, weren't they? They mentioned WCW/NWO Revenge and WrestleMania 2000, and yeah, they were alright, but No Mercy was always the one everyone was properly hyped for. There's a Q&A section here answering some burning questions. 10 arenas, and apparently massive, with backstage areas too like you see on the telly, which is a nice touch. Full entrances for all the wrestlers, theme songs and taunts included, even for the likes of Chris Benoit and The Undertaker, which is pretty standard really. Someone asked about blood, and typical European censorship strikes again. No blood in our versions thanks to those Germans. But the Yanks and Japanese versions get all the red stuff. There's an info burst box, all the techie bits really. 128 megabit cart, up to 4 players, controller and rumble puck yes, expansion puck no, and transfer puck yes. US release in November, UK in December, and Japan TBA. Anticipation rating is maxed out. 4 little red dots, proper excited were they? Or no? The screenshots show off cage matches, and they reckon the cage is missing a side, which is a bit of a howler. Apparently, the CPU wrestlers love smashing you with metal cabinets, which sounds about right for wrestling games. Create a Wrestler mode is supposed to be brilliant, loads of options to tinker with. Replays for the really nasty moves too. They're banging on about new moves you can buy in the game's mall, and some link with the Game Boy Color version. Bold claim that it'll be better than WrestleMania 2000. And a little bit at the end saying it's a bit racy, too racy to print what one of the ladies in the game is saying. Cheeky. Review in the next issue apparently, can't wait. This page is about Ultimate War, a game that was supposed to be on the 64DD, that disk drive thing that didn't really take off, but now it's coming out on a proper cartridge, a hefty 256 megabit one mind you. They're saying it's a bit old school strategy, going against the likes of Command & Conquer, which is fair enough, but it's promising a very realistic war experience with TV news style camera angles, zooming and shaking about when shells go off, like proper war footage. Apparently you'll see crawling ground troops, shell-spitting tanks and even nuclear explosions, all rendered in staggering detail. Bit much maybe, but we'll see. There's a Q&A section where they confirm the camera stuff, and mention that online play was planned for the 64DD version, so you could have battled blokes in Japan, but that's gone now, it's on cartridge. Shame really, that 64DD online idea was interesting, even if nobody had one. Elsewhere on the page, under an ear to the ground, there's some news about Resident Evil 0. Apparently, it's been canned for the N64 because of technical restraints, which seems a bit daft seeing as they managed Resi 2 alright. But it's supposedly going to GameCube instead, and they reckon it will be out in Japan in July. There's also news about Paper Mario being pushed back to early next year in America, so we probably won't see it here until Easter or even later. Typical. At least Pokemon Puzzle League is still on for December, so that's something for Christmas. Seems like Vatical Entertainment have had a load of delays on their N64 games, everything except VR Powerboat that is. And Polaris Snowcross, Sea-Doo Hydrocross, and Carnivale, they are still meant to be out before Christmas too, apparently. Right at the bottom there's a tiny bit about Mario Party 3, saying it's out in Japan on December 7th, which means we should get it here not too long after. Fingers crossed for that one. This page is a special interrogation with Shigeru Miyamoto, right? They've called him the Spielberg of video games. Pah! As they rightly say, he's much more important. It's an interview article highlighting his massive influence, going all the way back to Donkey Kong and then on to stone cold classics like Super Mario Bros., Zelda, and of course Super Mario 64. Geiseishi. The article bangs on about his philosophy of games being fun, above all else, which is spot on, in it. They call him Shigsy, bit cringe that, but alright. They mention the top coders at Rare, Konami and Capcom, and how lucky Nintendo are to have Miyamoto. Apparently he was dancing and playing banjo at the European GameCube announcement in August, which sounds like a laugh. There are a couple of screenshots, one of Ganondorf from Zelda, they're raving about the detail on his fingernails on the GameCube, and another of Luigi with ghosts, showing off the transparency effects presumably also on the GameCube. It mentions the Meowth's Party demo from that GameCube event too, which I vaguely remember, something to do with Pokemon no doubt. It's all about the upcoming GameCube and showing off what it can do, very forward looking for December 2000. When the N64 was still chugging along nicely. This page in N64 Magazine is diving deep into the upcoming GameCube. It's billed as a special interrogation, which sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? The main feature is about a game called Too Human from Silicon Knights. Apparently it was originally meant for the PlayStation, but Nintendo snapped up the developers. They're pushing this as a mature adventure game, something a bit different, combining adventuring and blasting, and they're promising FMV cutscenes and a cerebral experience, whatever that means. Sounds a bit pretentious, but we'll see. Pretty. There's a side panel called The Games listing upcoming titles. It's a right mixed bag of stuff, some for the N64 and some clearly for the GameCube, showing what's in the pipeline. Mario 128 is mentioned, Shigsy's demo they call it, likely bundled with the console, apparently finished. Star Wars, Rogue Squadron 2 is there, promising flashy visuals. Then there's Tornado, Perfect Dark 2 Joe Dark returns, or maybe doesn't. Cheeky, Mickey's Big Adventure, Metroid, obviously Too Human again, Pokemon GC, Resident Evil 0 exclusive to GameCube, they're keen to point out Luigi's Mansion, Zelda GC, Wave Race 2, and Robocop. Quite the list to get excited about back then. Warranty. The rest of the page is structured as a Q&A, grilling someone, presumably a Nintendo bigwig, about the GameCube. They're asking why the GameCube is being described as first of its kind. The answer is all marketing spiel about unique viewpoint and software creators. They're also asked if the GameCube will win the console wars, and they're playing it coy, saying they're not cowards but just focused on making good games. Fair enough, I suppose. There's a question about moving from cartridges to discs, a bit of a sore point apparently, but they're saying they've taken steps to minimize loading times, and the sheer memory of discs will make up for it. And then there's a question about the controller design. Apparently they spent 3 years on it with loads of versions, aiming for something easy enough for anyone to use, even your nan. They touch on what to expect from big Nintendo characters, and the answer is basically yes, of course we're doing Mario & Co. games on GameCube. There's a mention of the staff who worked on Lilac Wars being eager for new projects, but they don't want to just churn out sequels. Good on them. Then they ask about Metroid, and the answer is pretty much yeah, you saw it at Space World, in the demo footage. Apparently they weren't even allowed to call it a Metroid game in the demo, bit weird. Ori. Finally, there's a question about Luigi's Mansion, and if it shows a more mature side of Mario. They seem to think Luigi is less childish in this game, which is their idea of mature, I guess. And they wrap it up asking if the GameCube will be as big a leap as the N64 was, and they say it'll be more like the jump from the NES to the SNES, offering a matured version of what's already out there. Oh, and there's a little screenshot from Super Mario 128 with loads of those little Mario sprite things running about. And a quote bubble saying, "I had much more to show at Space World, but the PR department told me no." Sounds like they were itching to reveal more but got told off by the suits. Typical. This page is the N64 Special Interrogations section, looks like an interview. We've got a chap being quizzed about games, presumably someone important at Nintendo. There's a picture of Pokemon Stadium being mentioned, talking about Meowth's Party being rocked. A bit of a silly comment really, but it's showing off the Stadium games and their models. Then there's talk about Luigi being more mature in games, not like Conker's Bad Fur Day, which is a bit of a dig, perhaps implying Mario games are aimed at a younger audience. The interview touches on creating new characters. Seems like they are thinking about it as Pokemon is so popular. They are also being cagey about showing new games due to leaks. Makes sense in a pre-internet leak frenzy world. There's a quote in a speech bubble. "I think we should be spending time and money making magic. I'm looking forward to realizing this approach on GameCube." Sounds like they're bigging up the GameCube and its potential. Gay. There's a section about where ideas come from. Sounds like they're just brainstorming and chatting to people, trying to figure out what gamers want. They talk about spending money on graphics and sound, which was the big push back then, wasn't it? Also mentions communication between parents and kids for Animal Forest on the N64, which became Animal Crossing later. There's a question about third-party support, and they're saying it'll be easy to develop for GameCube compared to the N64 cartridge system. Good news for more games, hopefully. They get asked about other developers they admire, mentioning Rare, which was a big name back then known for good games. Warrington Norse. Then it moves on to future plans, wanting to make unique games, mentioning responsibility at Nintendo as a director, so this is someone high up. They are working on about 30 titles at once, focusing on Mario and Zelda, wanting small teams for game development. They are keen on making games for the whole family to enjoy. There's a bit about GameCube and GBA online capabilities, aiming for launch with the modem, which was a big deal at the time. Online gaming on consoles was just starting to take off. And lastly, a funny question about still playing the banjo. He laughs it off, saying he's bad at banjo but plays guitar. Down the side, on the drawing board, lists a bunch of upcoming games. There's Creatures, some sort of breed your own furry mammal thing for PC. The Land Before Time game, based on the cartoon. Tiny Toons and Animaniacs games, cartoon tie-ins, probably aimed at kids. Knights, a medieval action game. The Thing, based on the John Carpenter film, could be moody and scary. Jurassic Park 2i, on GameCube naturally. Crash Bandicoot, platforming like on PlayStation. Donald Duck, Quack Attack, average platformer for GameCube. Superman, hopefully not coded by Titus, which is a sarcastic jab at a developer known for poor Superman games. US Football, from Retro Studios, photo quality graphics, fancy. Thunder Rally, driving game from Retro Studios again. Retro RPG, also from Retro Studios, with floating cities, sounds interesting. And Metal Gear 2, some kind of link-up with the Game Boy version. Below all that, there's a GameCube update bit with a picture of a forest scene called Rebirth. It's created by Mixcore, and supposed to show off GameCube graphics. They say it's like Too Human and Space World 2000, and it's got a gorgeous forest habitat. Apparently, it's streaming straight off a GameCube disc, and shows off the kind of graphical detail to expect. Sounds like they are really pushing the graphical power of the GameCube. This page is all about GameCube myths being debunked, right as we were all getting properly hyped for Nintendo's new console. They've got a panel of developers here: Dennis Dyack from Silicon Knights, Mike Lamb from Left Field, Dallin Christensen from Sapphire, Paul Hellier from H2O Entertainment, and Colin Gordon from Boss Games, all giving their takes. Myth number 1 is, GameCube doesn't look that great, does it? Colin from Boss Games reckons everything looks weird at first, and Nintendo's trying to be different, stand out from the hyphy stack. He admits he was initially a bit disappointed but then thought it was pretty cool up close, liking the shape and size. Mike from Left Field thinks it might be redesigned for the US and Europe anyway, which is a bit of a dig, suggesting Nintendo might be changing things up. Myth number 2 is, GameCube can't be that easy to develop for, surely. Dennis from Eternal Darkness Dyack says it's the best designed console he's seen, ahead of its time, specifically for games, and a monster in every category. Mike from Left Field mentions the memory is good, fast to access, and Paul from H2O Entertainment thinks Nintendo learned lessons from the N64. Dennis adds that Nintendo has created a machine that does what they say, letting creative developers focus on content, and he expects loads of developers to jump to GameCube. Myth number 3 is, won't the lack of DVD playability damage GameCube's chances? Colin from Boss Games thinks Nintendo doesn't want to confuse GameCube's purpose, aiming it at gamers rather than everyone. Dennis from Silicon Knights thinks piracy is a big issue, and that a proprietary format prevents it from happening, which is fair enough considering the state of game piracy even back then. Mike from Left Field reckons a DVD player would have added 20 quid to the price of each console. Paul from H2O Entertainment says it means they can produce the console cheaper, and he likes the tiny discs, maybe for a handheld NGC soon, which is a bit cheeky, preempting the DS years before it arrived. This page addresses a few myths surrounding the upcoming GameCube, as we were all wondering back then what Nintendo was up to. Myth 4 is about marketing, suggesting Nintendo might mess it up. They're talking about Nintendo playing it cool, the wait-and-see approach, while Sony with the PlayStation 2 and Microsoft with the Xbox were really pushing the multimedia angle. The magazine folks reckon this might actually work in Nintendo's favor, focusing purely on games. Myth 5 is the controller, and yeah, everyone thought it looked a bit odd at first, didn't they? Four-pronged is how they describe it. Colin says it feels weird until you actually play with it. Dennis reckons it's awesome, a real commitment to control and something totally new. They even have a little box out saying, once you've got GameCube's joypad in your hands, you'll be in love. Bit strong, but we were all intrigued, weren't we? Myth 6 asks if Nintendo is wrong to stay quiet until the next E3 show. Colin argues that showing too much too soon loses the impact, mentioning the massive queues for Mario 64 at E3 back in '96. They're aiming for that same level of excitement again. Dennis was surprised at how much was shown at Space World, but reckons Nintendo is doing the right thing by not overdoing it. Dallin thinks Nintendo will have time to build up the hype, get some demos ready, and then blow everyone away at E3. Paul reckons with Sony and Microsoft battling it out, Nintendo can just concentrate on making great games, and then surprise everyone with titles at E3. Myth 7 is about GameCube launch titles suffering from a lack of them. Dennis has seen some of the launch games and is hyped, saying Nintendo's launch lineup will be the strongest ever. He thinks development is easy on the GameCube, which is good news. Dallin hopes they'll support more developers this time, instead of just a few like with the N64 Dream Team. He reckons there will be fewer games at launch, but they'll be top quality, which he prefers. He's a bit worried Nintendo might wait too long for Shigeru Miyamoto to finish his games though. Myth 8 is about Nintendo's frosty relationship with developers causing trouble. Paul says he's never had issues with Nintendo, they've always been helpful. Dennis agrees, saying they're close to Nintendo and learned a lot from them, communicating ideas and gameplay with the people at Nintendo of America. Mike reckons if a game is good on PS2, it'll be great on GameCube too, as development is easy, and he doesn't see it happening the other way around to Sony's detriment. He thinks there's something magical about working with Nintendo. Warrington Maymore. Finally, Myth 9 asks if Nintendo should be pushing online play more. Dennis thinks internet games aren't really happening yet, and Nintendo has more experience than first-party developers. Dallin says it opens up possibilities, from simple two-player games to massive online RPGs. Paul likes the idea of choosing between broadband or 56K modems to keep costs down. Sensible thinking really, wasn't it back then? This page is the front cover of Game Boy Planet magazine, issue 23 from December 2000. Right then, so what have we got here? Looks like they're reviewing Grand Theft Auto 2 on page 41. Time for more felony-filled driving action, they're saying. Seems about right for GTA. And Jungle Book on page 42. Does Mowgli and Chum's Jungle Adventure deliver more than platforming's bare necessities? Bit of a deep question for a Jungle Book game, isn't it? The main game they're pushing is Warlocked, calling it Ace Real-Time Strategy for your GBC. Real-time strategy on the Game Boy Color, that's ambitious. I remember being intrigued by that one, seeing if they could actually pull it off on the old GBC. Down in the corner, they're teasing GBA screens, with Golden Sun, Napoleon Castlevania, Circle of the Moon and much more. Oh yeah, the Game Boy Advance was on the horizon back then, wasn't it? Everyone was getting excited about what that little handheld could do, especially after the Game Boy Color. Then there's a Plus section with Game Boy Gallery, more of your muties on display, top tips for the latest GB titles, and games like Pokemon Pinball, Azure Dreams and Ask Oak. Sounds like your typical mix of stuff you'd expect in a Game Boy mag back then. Tips and previews, gallery of reader stuff, you know the drill. Issue 23, December 2000, another month of handheld gaming back in the day. Simpler times, eh? This page is from the Planet Game Boy section, issue 23, December 2000 of the magazine. It starts off moaning about Nintendo hiking up the price of Game Boy cartridges by $1. Honestly, at the time, this was a proper pain for the smaller game companies trying to make a living on the Game Boy. The article suggests that maybe these lesser-known publishers should just pack it in if they can't make decent games. Bit harsh, but you could see the point. They mention titles being unadulterated crap, which is pretty strong stuff for a games mag, innit? They reckon it's daylight robbery trying to sell rubbish games for good money, and that the price increase might force companies to actually make better games for once. They even joke that publishers might jump ship to PlayStation 2, or even the bloody Xbox, remember, that was brand new back then, nobody knew what to expect. And they warn that Game Boy Advance carts will be even more expensive, which, looking back, they weren't wrong about, were they? Then there's a piece on the WonderSwan Color, Bandai's little handheld that had been out in Japan for ages, and was finally coming to the US. They were saying it was a budget handheld. I recall seeing it in import shops, it was a bit weird, played games sideways. They mention it sold nearly 2 million units in Japan. They're comparing it to the Game Boy Advance, saying it's a 16-bit machine but not really in the same league, but reckons it's better than the Neo Geo Pocket, which was another handheld kicking around at the time. They mention a new Final Fantasy game and Squaresoft backing it. There's a little screenshot of a Gundam RPG game, looking very Japanese, saying it's Oriental. They reckon it'll shift loads of units in Japan. They also say the WonderSwan Color has better graphics than the Neo Geo Pocket, calling it the last pretender to Game Boy's crown. Bit strong that, as the Neo Geo Pocket was alright. Finally, there's a section titled, You're Kidding, Right? It shows screenshots from Alone in the Dark on the Game Boy Color. Survival horror on the Game Boy Color? Sounds ambitious. They're proper surprised by the graphics, saying it looks more like a Game Boy Advance game. They mentioned seeing an early version at the E3 show, and it looked rubbish, but these new screenshots look loads better. They can't believe it's running on the old Game Boy Color and wonder if it's some kind of trick to make it look this good. They mention that the Game Boy Color can display still images, and some games have used FMV cutscenes. but they're unsure if this is genuine in-game graphics. They say they'll investigate. There are a couple of screenshots, one of a big monster, and another of a creepy corridor. They do look quite good for the Game Boy Color, to be fair. They end by saying, whatever it is, let's hope it makes it to this country. Yeah, wonder if that ever actually came out properly. This page is all about the Game Boy Advance, buzzing about some of the games coming to Nintendo's new handheld. First up, it's Golden Sun, an RPG from Camelot, those guys who did Mario Golf and Mario Tennis. Apparently it was meant for the N64 originally, but they shifted it to the GBA, which sounds sensible. They're saying it's going to be a big launch title. Judging by the screenshots, it's got that classic RPG look with turn-based battles, and the reviewer reckons the graphics are lovely, especially since it was supposed to be an N64 game. Seems like you start off a bit of a nobody in the game, and need to prove yourself. Hasawa. Then there's Napoleon. Now this looks like a strategy game, a bit like Command & Conquer or Warlords, but on the GBA. They saw a Japanese version at Space World, so they're not sure when we'll get it over here. It's based on the French Emperor, Napoleon himself, and it sounds like you're building an empire, telling soldiers what to do with a simple menu system. They reckon it's fast and smooth, and you can set up formations for your troops, which is neat. Lastly, they're talking about Castlevania, Circle of the Moon. Classic Castlevania on the GBA, can't really go wrong, can you? They say it's the traditional 2D style, which is what everyone wants really. Graphics aren't quite as amazing as some other 32-bit games apparently, but it can still do some special effects. The whip attack will be familiar to anyone who's played a Castlevania game since the NES. They're comparing it to the NES and SNES versions, and saying it's somewhere in between, wanting some special effects from Konami. Sounds alright, should keep us going until the next proper console games come out. This page is a review for Warlocked on the Game Boy from Planet Game Boy section. Right then, Warlocked, a proper RTS on the Game Boy, who would have thought it? The reviewer seems proper chuffed with it, giving it a full 5 stars. Calling it essential even. They're saying it's a return to the basics for real-time strategy. And it's actually funny. They mention building barracks and defensive towers, gathering resources, the usual RTS stuff. But on a Game Boy. Apparently there are no menus, so it's all quick commands. They're going on about solo missions, bonus games, and even a 2-player mode being top-notch for the Game Boy, comparing it to Perfect Dark and Metal Gear Solid on the same handheld. Which is a bold statement, isn't it? They're even jokingly threatening Nintendo to release it here in the UK. Or else. There's bits about wizards with special powers who can turn enemies into chickens, armies you can build up, bosses like a pink dragon that archers struggle with, cheats, and even playing as evil instead of good guys for a different experience. Sounds like they proper liked it, maybe worth a look if you were into your strategy games. On the go back then. This page is a review for Grand Theft Auto 2 on the Game Boy Color. RRRESPECK is the headline, which is a bit much, isn't it? They're saying crime has escalated since the first game, and you'll bump into all sorts of gangs like the Yakuza and the Rednecks, even mentioning Cotton Eye Joe, bless 'em. Bit of a cheesy reference even back then. The review talks about the humor being very GTA, and the missions are still the same, getting calls on payphones and being told where to go next. Apparently the city is one big sprawl now, instead of separate neighborhoods, which makes getting around a bit easier. They reckon driving is a bit tricky without analog controls. You'll be plowing into walls at first, typical Game Boy Color controls really. They got a bit sarcastic about character choice not making much difference and carjacking being a deadly business, ho-hum. They mention getting paper maps in the PC version, which you obviously don't get on the Game Boy Color. The reviewer gives it 4 out of 5 stars, saying the controls robbed it of the full 5. There are screenshots showing the game paused, getting busted by the police, the character select screen, and a killed screen with a fella flat out on the pavement. Very convincing, darling. They joke about that one. Oh, and they've got a bit of a random quote. Guns on the roof, like the Clash said. Right, bit random. Price is £25, from Take-Two, password link up, and only out now it says, so it's just been released then, December 2000. Seems alright I suppose, another version of GTA, to cause a bit of mayhem on the go. This page is a review section from N64 Planet Game Boy. First up we have Jungle Book from Ubisoft. 25 quid it was, password save only, no link up, color only, and out now apparently. They reckon it's a decent Disney platformer, unlike that dinosaur game, and the FMV intro is supposed to be quite the spectacle for the Game Boy Color. They say it actually plays well too, which is always a bonus, isn't it? Rurus. Sounds like it eases you in with tutorials from the jungle animals, teaching you the moves, and then you're off leaping about like Mowgli, doing puzzles, collecting panther coins, and even racing wolf cubs or riding panthers. They mention it starts slow but gets going, and the learning curve is smooth. They seem impressed with the animation and the sense of progress. Bit of a downer though, as they point out average Game Boy Color platformers were 10 a penny back then, and this one is simple, but despite that they still thought it was entertaining, well balanced, and looked nice. Highly recommended apparently. Gave it a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Ooh boy. Then there's Aladdin, also from Ubisoft, same price and specs as Jungle Book. They start off a bit sarcastic, saying some readers might be raising an eyebrow at this Disney platformer arriving so late, especially as it's basically a clone of a game that came out on PC and other platforms way back in '94. Not a great start, is it? Ay. Apparently, Aladdin is a straightforward 2D platformer, lacking innovation and heavy on repetition. They describe it as near-identical scrapes in exotic locations, desert, gloomy caves, Arabian city, you get the picture. Visually nothing special. They mention a funny enemy, a tubby bloke whose trousers fall down when you stab him, and you have to lob apples or swipe your knife to deal with enemies, who frustratingly respawn quickly. Not all bad though, they say there's some humor. And they mention Robin Williams' voice actor making a cameo. They admit Aladdin was fun back in '94 and '95, but then so were the Spice Girls. Bit of a backhanded compliment that. They say the locations are alright, you can climb and swing about, and there's a geezer selling extra lives for gems. Climbing sections are there, and you get to chop an evil-looking parrot. Ultimately they only gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Ouch. Sounds like Jungle Book was the better bet here. This page features a couple of Game Boy Color reviews. Right then, let's have a look, shall we? First up, it's Army Men 2. Crikey, they were still banging these out, were they? This one's from 3DO, and it's 25 quid, which isn't bad for a Game Boy cart. They reckon you can link 2 Game Boys up for a bit of multiplayer action, and its color, of course, being on the GBC. Out now, apparently. Meh. So, Army Men 2, yeah, it's that isometric viewpoint like Commando and Ikari Warriors from back in the day on the Spexy and that sort of thing. They're saying the controls are a bit fiddly with the rotation thing, and combat boils down to running up and hammering the A button. Sounds about right for Army Men, to be honest. Not exactly known for its tactical depth, is it? Apparently there are jeeps and tanks and stuff, which is something I suppose. They mention the FMV scenes are like every Vietnam film ever made, which might be a bit harsh, but I get their drift. They've given it a 3 out of 5, saying it's entertaining enough but nothing special, suggesting you should play Metal Gear Solid or Perfect Dark instead, which on the N64, yeah, fair enough, they are classics, aren't they? GoldenEye gets a shout out too, of course it does. Torieg. Then there's Dinosaur, from Ubisoft, another 25 quid, no link up on this one, color only if you've got a color printer, remember those? Madness. Also out now. Dinosaur, right, like the Disney film. It's a top-down adventure game, where you control a team of dinos and solve puzzles. Apparently you need to swap between different dinos to get through each bit. They're not pulling any punches about the graphics, calling them bland and the dinosaurs just blobs. Ouch. They reckon it's a wasted license and given it a 2 out of 5. They even say the Jungle Book review on the other page is better, which really isn't saying much, is it? And they are taking the mickey out of the brown and uninspiring landscapes. Cheeky sods. Sounds like a bit of a stinker, to be honest. Maybe stick to the film, eh? The next page is all about Pokemon Pinball on the Game Boy, and a bit of advice from Professor Oak. There's a big Ask Oak section, where some trainer called Sean from Manchester is stuck in the ice cave in Silver. Bless him, Oak gives him a ridiculously specific walkthrough. Up, left, up, right and all that jazz. Remember those days poring over guides for stuff like that? Another trainer, Catherine, is having trouble with the 5th gym in Silver. Turns out she needs to sort out the lighthouse lady in Asagi first. Typical Pokemon, always sending you on these wild goose chases. Ruff, you'd. Alongside the Pokemon advice, there's a feature on Pokemon Pinball. It's got tips on how to get extra Pokeballs, Great Balls, Ultra Balls, and even Master Balls in the pinball game, which is pretty handy. They're also going through the slot effects, like ball savers and bonus multipliers, all the usual pinball stuff but Pokemon style. It mentions Twin Pikachus and Go to Bonus, which sound like fun power-ups. Below the Pokemon Pinball bit, there's a tiny section for Tonka Construction Zone, giving a stage select code BG6SNAS. Remember Tonka? Those games were alright for a bit if you were into diggers and stuff. It's a pretty packed page of Game Boy goodness, harking back to when Pokemon and simple games like Tonka were all the rage on the handheld. This page is all about Game Boy games, it seems, proper pocket money stuff back then. Right at the top there's Hot Wheels Stunt Track Driver. Remember that one? They're giving away all the cheat codes to unlock tracks and cars, complete level warps, and passwords for different levels like Slide Out and Twin Mill. Handy if you were stuck. They even have cheats for stuff like Toe Jam and Way Too Fast levels. Good game for its time, simple but fun. Then there's Azure Dreams. Bit of a weird one that. They're talking about getting monsters in it, giving some alternative methods and price listings. Looks like they're listing all the different monsters and items, with prices for things like Crook and Bronzino monsters, right up to Fire Gem. And then there's a section on fusion, combining your monsters. You had to get the order right apparently to make a daymare, for example. It mentions combining a catawump and mushroom. Odd game, but some people were really into it. Finally, we've got the high scores table, which was always a bit of a laugh to see if you made it in. Pokemon Pinball is topping the charts in red and blue categories. Some serious scores there from Robbie Klein and Zamir Bandali. Mario Deluxe is next. James Holt and David Noble are up there. Then Tetris DX with some impressive times and scores from Alan McMonagle and Richard Ford. And lastly, Game & Watch Gallery 3, with Jonathan Dene and Francis Atkins getting mentions. It's all good classic Game Boy stuff, really takes you back. This page from the magazine is dedicated to the Game Boy camera. Remember that quirky little add-on? It's the Game Boy Gallery, and it's full of user-submitted pictures. Mainly folks trying to be a bit spooky, given it's around Halloween time it seems. We start off with a winner, some Welsh bloke, James Batty, who has turned himself into a zombie using the Game Boy camera. Apparently he's won an action pack for his efforts, which back then was a decent prize, bundling together a few bits and bobs for your Game Boy like batteries, and a carry case Joytech branded stuff, reliable enough. Then we've got a selection of other snaps. Tim Rudyard from Manchester has apparently lovingly captured a very special person. Judging by the picture they've put in, it looks like a baby. Possibly a bit gurning. Now leave us alone, they say. Cheeky. Ruben Lodge has sent in a pleasing negative image, which just looks like a blurry face. Nothing too special there. Eskil Vestra has gone for a spooky alien vibe, with a picture of something that's meant to be an E.T., and the magazine folks are playing along saying, E.T. please go home. Right now, X'd up. There's someone calling their picture Pikachu. It's a dog that someone reckons looks like Pikachu, but with a mustache. They're joking about the Poke Police getting involved. A bit of a laugh at the whole Pokemon craze. Richard Simpkin from Bath has submitted a Zelda-themed picture, but the comment is just, we're moving offices. Bit random, not sure what that's about. Philip Nash from York obviously finds pumpkins deeply scary. His picture is a pumpkin, fair enough. Halloween related. Someone else has sent in a picture inspired by the band Morphine, saying, I've got a head with wings, quoting their song. They reckon the band didn't know what Sam Mead was cooking. Again, a bit cryptic. Sam Troch from Belgium apparently looks like he's prepared to eat his own finger. It's a picture of a mouth, a bit grim. They suggest dipping it in chocolate first. Nice. Dave Friars sent in a Mickey Mousey-like. It's a blurry picture that vaguely resembles Mickey Mouse. Hi-de-ho, says Dave. Ford Cotterill from Suffolk has got a picture of a dog that they reckon is Link's canine counterpart. Link being the bloke from Zelda, obviously. Calvin Mackenzie from Stockport has sent in a picture asking, why does the cow weep? It's a picture of a cow, they reckon they know why. Mysterious. Deborah Patterson from London has submitted a picture of someone called Cowra, and they reckon Cowra won't be happy. Looks like it might be a bit of an unflattering shot. Martin Platt from Helsby has been keeping busy and produced a chunky-looking dogman. It's a slightly odd picture of a dog-like face. Finally, Edward Rummins from Ashford has got the Pika Love again with another Pikachu picture, and they're asking why are we running away then? Suggesting Pikachu isn't that scary, despite the earlier Pikachu comment. The main text bit is titled, Karma Police, Arrest This Mutie. Bit dramatic. It's talking about Halloween and using the Game Boy camera to capture freaks. They're making a joke about using your feet as Mutie Capture's greatest tools. It's all a bit silly and light-hearted. It's basically encouraging people to take spooky photos with their Game Boy cameras. Joopy. There's also a bit about the Action Pack prize again, saying it's courtesy of Joytech, and lists what's in it: mains adapter, rechargeable battery, light magnifier, carry case and a clear purple Game Boy Pocket. Not a bad haul, as they say. They're asking readers to send us your freaks, and there's an address to send pictures to, the Game Boy Gallery at the N64 Magazine offices in Bath. It's saying every month, only within the pages of N64, emphasizing it's an N64 Magazine exclusive feature. It's all about being creative with the Game Boy camera, and getting your pictures in the mag. Good bit of fun, really, back in the day. This page of N64 Arena magazine is diving into the latest game reviews for the N64. Right at the top, it's screaming about an exclusive for San Francisco Rush 2049. Yeah, I remember that one. Proper futuristic racing game, set in, well, future San Francisco. They're calling it frighteningly fast, which, back then, probably meant it was a bit nippy compared to the usual races. They're telling you to go to page 50 for the full review. Warrington Nogri. Next up, we have Hercules, The Legendary Journeys. Another TV tie-in, this time from Titus. Remember them? Always a bit hit and miss, weren't they? They're asking if it's a hit or a myth, typical reviewer speak. Page 56 if you're curious about that one. Then there's a section about the import arena, basically reminding you to check out games from America and Japan, games we might not be seeing over here straight away. They've even got a picture for Pokemon Puzzle League there. That was a decent puzzler, wasn't it? Perfect puzzling with Pika and pals, they say. Page 60 for that review. Lastly, it's Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness. Mr. Pac's other half pops the pills in a gem from Namco. Bit of a weird way to put it, but yeah, that was Ms. Pac-Man in 3D. Always good to see Namco classics get a bit of an update. Page 64 for the lowdown on that. Seems like a packed page of reviews this month. This page is all about how N64 Magazine reviews games, laying it all out for you. It's got sections called INFO Burst and If You're in a Hurry, explaining their reviewing process. The INFO Burst bit for Metroid 64 is showing what kind of quick details they give you, like who made it, Nintendo naturally, the size of the cartridge 256 megabit, which was pretty hefty back then, player count, controller pack support, save types, whether it used the expansion or rumble packs, release dates for US, UK and Japan, and even the cost, £40. Then there's the If You're in a Hurry part, which breaks down the review into quick snippets, pluses and minuses, if you like this, which recommends similar games. Mickey Mouse 64 gets a shout out here, comparing it to Mickey Mania, which I remember on the Mega Drive. Then they go into visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and finally, verdict. Below that, it explains how they score games with percentages. 85% and above is star game territory, proper top tier stuff. 84% to 70% is still great, well worth adding to your collection. 69% to 50% is average, perfectly playable but nothing special. 49% to 20% is where you find lazily made games to be avoided, and 19% to 0% is disaster zone, absolute rubbish. At the bottom, there's TEAM 64 inches talking about another racing game, and it mentions something about the petrol shortage at the time, remember that? Each team member has picked a game of the month. Andrea Ball picked Ms. Pac-Man, Justin Webb went for Rush 2049, Mark Green chose Pokemon Puzzle, Dark Mark bizarrely went with Hercules the Disney game, Martin Kitts also picked Pokemon Puzzle, Paul Edwards chose Rush 2049, Alan Madrell went with Hercules again, Steve Jaleem with Rush 2049 again, and finally Geraint Evans also picked Rush 2049. Seems like Rush 2049 was the racing game they were on about, and was clearly the game of the moment for most of the team. Bit of a mixed bag of game of the month choices otherwise though. This page is all about San Francisco Rush 2049, proper arcade racer that. Seems like N64 Magazine got a sneak peek at Midway's latest, saying it's their next big racer since N64 46ths, whatever that means. They reckon the scenery moves really fast and smooth, which was always a big deal back then, wasn't it? Getting those graphics right on the 64. There's a section called INFO Burst, which is giving us the details. 128 megabit cart size, that's a decent chunk of memory for an N64 game back then. Up to 4 players. Good for a laugh with your mates. Controller pack needs 9 pages apparently. Blimey, that's a lot of memory. Looks like password save and cartridge save are a no-go, but expansion pack and rumble pack are in, thank goodness for rumble. Transfer packering is a no as well, probably not much need for that. Out now in the US and UK, but Japan's TBA, typical. Cost is £45, ouch, games were pricey back then, weren't they? There are little pointers with the screenshots, bits of advice, switches are mentioned for shortcuts or hidden coins, classic arcade stuff. They say the computer isn't amazing, but the lead car is tough. Sounds about right. Keep your eyes peeled for dodgy side roads. Taking risks for first place is always worth it apparently. This one is about bigger holes, saying you can scale walls like F-Zero, which is interesting. Wings are in, you've got to squeeze through gaps, must be some air stunts then. Multiplayer is only 2 players though, which is a bit of a shame, but still a laugh apparently. This page features San Francisco Rush 2049, with a section called Turn On Tune Up, showing how to customize your cars. It kicks off by saying there are loads of cars to pick from, but initially, they're all a bit samey, aren't they? Then it shows you how collecting coins dotted around the tracks unlocks upgrades for your engine and tires. You can tinker with your ride until it's just how you want it, which is fair enough. There are these little panels showing the different menus. You start by picking your car, a yellow one in the pick, then you collect coins, then you can modify things like engine and tires, and finally if you're feeling flash you can change the bodywork and rims. It mentions the Game Boy Color version of Rush 2049 too, saying it's shaping up nicely and is a decent handheld version of its bigger N64 brother. The main text talks about how long it's been since the N64 had a proper racer, and mentions Ridge Racer 64, Top Gear Rally 2, World Driver, and F1 World Grand Prix as decent games. It's right, there were a few decent races, but nothing truly mind-blowing for a bit. It then goes on about Midway's Rush games, San Francisco Rush and Rush 2, Extreme Racing USA, and how they were a bit different and defied gravity. It hypes up San Francisco Rush 2049 as being special and taking you on a white-knuckle ride with crazy stunts, which is what the Rush games were always about, wasn't it? Down at the bottom corner, there are a couple of gameplay tips, one saying even if it looks like a dead end you should drive through it, and another saying you need plenty of speed for the loops. Solid advice for a Rush game, really. It's branded as an N64 star game, and at the bottom it says December 2000 and page 51, so this was pretty close to Christmas back then. This page is about Rush 2049, looking like a preview in N64 Magazine. They're calling it Racing Game, Schmassing Game, which is a bit daft, even for them back then. It's broken down into sections like Stunt and Practice, which seems to be highlighting the different ways you can play. They're making a big deal about the cars having wings, saying they don't let you fly exactly, but help you reach high spots. Essential for mid-air maneuvering apparently, and stopping your leather interior from roasting on re-entry. Very dramatic. The stunt arena sounds like your classic over-the-top arcade racer stuff, flipping and twisting your car. The practice mode is described as a proper game in itself, focusing on coin collecting and mastering tracks. They mention using shortcuts, jumps and loops. Standard fare for a racer, but Rush 2049 was known for being a bit more outlandish. Then there's a section called Show Me the Money, which looks like a guide to finding hidden coins in the game. It goes through steps on how to drive vertically up a building to reach a rooftop halfpipe for more stunts. Utter insanity, they say, driving up the face of a building. Yeah, it was pretty wild at the time, wasn't it? Coin collecting being horrifyingly addictive, according to them, but rewarding for perseverance. Always trying to get all those hidden bits, weren't you? E. 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 Warrington to Norkirk, Paya. They're pushing the boat car hybrid. Giant sharks, they mention, in stadium-sized aquariums. Typical Rush really, always a bit bonkers. Overall, it's a preview getting you hyped for Rush 2049, emphasizing the stunts, the crazy track design, and the coin collecting aspect. It was a proper arcade racer. This one, definitely something different, compared to your usual driving sims. This page showcases San Francisco Rush 2049, a bit of a look at some of the different game modes you could get stuck into. First up is Battle Mode, classic arena combat stuff, get in a motor, and blast your mates. It says here it's not quite Mario Kart Battle Mode, which is a fair point, nothing really tops that, is it? But it's still a decent distraction. Then there's Ghost Mode, which is your standard time trial, but with the added twist of racing against your own ghost, or even multiple ghosts of yourself from previous runs. A good way to hone your skills and shave off those precious seconds. There's a little box out to the side complaining about only 2-player racing in the standard mode, even though battle and stunt modes are 4-player. Bit of a downer really, especially back then when 4-player split screen was king. J4. Then at the bottom of the page, there's a guide on how to find some secret money in the game. It's all about cones and subway tunnels and wings on your car. Classic arcade racer secrets to uncover. Always good for bragging rights down the pub. They reckon discovering every secret will fill your pockets with gold. Perhaps a slight exaggeration there, lads. This page is from N64 Magazine, issue 48, page 54. It's all about San Francisco Rush 2049 on the N64. Looking at this now, it's quite a blast from the past, isn't it? They're reviewing Rush 2049, and it seems like they're pretty impressed overall, though with a bit of classic magazine sarcasm sprinkled in for good measure. They start off talking about how if you liked the previous Rush games, you'll probably like this one, which is fair enough really. They mention the futuristic racer vibe, neon lights, tunnels, the whole shebang, which was pretty standard fare for arcade racers back then but still quite cool. They point out the scenery surrounding the track is much better than older N64 racers, with skyscrapers and lava lamps, proper bonkers stuff. They highlight the interactive scenery like floors and walls you can smash through, which sounds like a laugh. There's a bit about a monster menu cheat section they found after playing for hours, which is classic N64 magazine stuff, always digging for secrets. Apparently, it's got invisible tracks and suicide mode, which sounds right up my street. They also mention shortcuts and getting gold coins as rewards, which is always a good incentive to explore. They do have a little moan about the AI opponents being a bit too easy and the handling being floaty twirly, but then they say it's still addictive and outrageous driving game fun. They even mention hidden gold and silver coins to collect, proper collectathon stuff that was everywhere back then. Essentially, it's a solid review, makes the game sound like a decent arcade racer for the N64 even if it's not perfect. It definitely captures the over-the-top, slightly daft but fun spirit of the Rush series, and they clearly enjoyed it despite a few minor niggles. Reading this back then, I'd probably have been quite tempted to give it a go myself. This page is all about crafty cuts in San Francisco Rush 2049, showing you how to cheat and find shortcuts, because apparently beating opponents on the track fairly is virtually impossible. Bit sarcastic that, in it points out hidden switches and devious ways to get ahead. GA. There are 3 main tips with screenshots, showing sneaky little ramps and hidden routes. Tip 1 is about a cheeky little side ramp after a corner to shave off time. Tip 2 involves cranking up the speed and activating your wings to get onto a rooftop. Tip 3 is about keeping control inside a tunnel to avoid curtains. They've got a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are things like a refreshing take on racing, massive tracks, super smooth visuals, challenging gameplay, loads of replay value, and that it's addictive. Minuses are that it's very frustrating, and the controls could be better. Controls on the N64 were rarely perfect, to be fair. If you like this section, recommends Wipeout 64 from Midway. Yeah, that's a decent shout. Futuristic racer, proper pumping soundtrack. Bit different to Rush though. The review also highlights the visuals, saying the cities move quickly with no pop-up, which was impressive back then. Sounds get a mention too, with thumping techno and trancey breakbeats, though they reckon the engine noises spoil it a bit. Mastery is praised because the cities are huge and it moves so well, and Lifespan gets a shout out for being rock hard with loads to unlock and collect. Verdict is a massive 91%, calling it an absolute corker of a game. Beautiful, fun, challenging and lasting. Fair score, San Francisco Rush 2049 was a blast on the N64, proper arcade thrills at home. They've given it a N64 Star Game Award as well. Good stuff. This page showcases Hercules, Legendary Journeys, based on the TV series One Suppose. It's titled Three's Company because you can play as 3 different characters: Hercules, Iolaus, and Serena. They each have their own style. Hercules is the bruiser, chucking enemies about and lifting big rocks. Classic Herc really. Iolaus is the clever one, climbing vines and investigating. Not quite as good in a scrap as Harmaic apparently. Then there's Serena, the centaur. Bit of an odd choice, but she's got a bow for taking down dragons. Juke. There are screenshots showing each character in action, lifting rocks, fighting enemies, and Serena with her bow. The reviewer is having a bit of a laugh at Serena's walk, calling it clippity-clop. Seems like typical game preview stuff, highlighting the different characters and their abilities. Down at the bottom there's an info burst box with all the details. Published by Titus, 128 megabit cart size, single player, uses 16 pages on the controller pack. Rumble pack is supported, but no expansion or transfer pack. Cartridge save only, no password save, thank goodness. It was out now, in the UK and US at the time, and TBA for Japan. Cost £40, standard price back then. They've got a little when's it out section with flags, pretty standard for the mag. Up top in the previously in N64 bit, they're on about how Player 1 has been playing a lot of Miyamoto's games, mentioning Blues Brothers 2000 and Mario 64 books, and even Ocarina of Time. They're saying textures might have been borrowed, and eagle-eared listeners might spot melodic similarities. Bit cheeky, suggesting they've been pinching ideas from Nintendo games, wouldn't be the first time. This page showcases a review of Hercules, the Legendary Journeys on the N64. It seems they quite liked the look of it, even though it's from the same stable as games like Blues Brothers 2000, Superman, and Taz Express, which, let's be honest, weren't exactly system sellers. They're saying it's set in ancient Greece, you're scrapping with Cyclops and chucking people about, the usual Herculean stuff. Boo. The review mentions that the combat is fairly satisfying but not quite up to Miyamoto's standard, which is a polite way of saying it's no Zelda. They point out the Zelda influence is quite strong, especially in the puzzle design and the way you explore. The story is based around Hera poisoning Zeus and Ares causing trouble, so it's down to Hercules to sort things out. Melior. There are a few screenshots with some amusing captions. One mentions a scribe chap who saves your game in a rather odd way, breaking the fourth wall a bit. Another highlights some very Californian dialogue, even referencing cheesy lines like, "Bruh, it's colder than New Yorkers out there," and "giggle," which sounds a bit cringe, even for back then. They also joke about a Cyclops needing vitamin D, which is a bit random. Overall, it sounds like a decent enough game for the time, if maybe a little rough around the edges compared to the real N64 classics. This page is a review of Hercules, the magical mystery tour on the N64. It's a bit of a jaunt around different locations in this Hercules world. They call it a magical mystery tour. They've broken it down into different areas, like Farm, Trachis, Thrace, Santa Manicus, Alpsius, and Mount Olympus. The farm area is where it all kicks off, apparently involving scarecrows and a mysterious scribe. Trachis seems like your first proper town, with a tailor, tavern, and a guard who's lost his teddy bear. Odd. Thrace is deserted, some sort of hub to visit other places like Santa Manicus, which is described as a sweaty beach with ladies, or Alpsius, a freezing place needing a special coat. Finally, there's Mount Olympus, where the gods have apparently popped their clogs, and Protector the god of railings is slacking off. The review also has a pluses and minuses section. Pluses are plenty of exploring, pleasingly crunchy combat, and it's pretty humorous. Minuses are that it squares up to Zelda and fails badly, it's repetitive, and the puzzles are simplistic. If you like this, they suggest Zelda, Ocarina of Time naturally. It's mentioned as being a 98% score in N64 Magazine, and Miyamoto's adventure that's still top dog. Graphics get a 7, sounds a 6, mastery a 6, and lifespan a 6. Mastery and lifespan both scoring a 6, which doesn't sound brilliant. The overall verdict is a bit cutting. They reckon fans of the Hercules TV show who haven't played Zelda will probably lap it up, but anyone with a brain should give it a wide berth. Ouch. It got a 66% overall, which is a bit mediocre really, isn't it? Sums it up as having potential but being a pallid and slightly slipshod imitation of better games. Strong words. Alan Madrell wrote the review, for those keeping score. This page is the Import Arena section, and this time it's all about Pokemon Puzzle League. It's flagged as a preview from issue 44 or 45, so a bit of a throwback even for this issue. They're saying it's fully independent from Nintendo, but it's obviously for the N64, and they are reviewing it because it's out in Japan and America already. They'll update the review when it hits the UKA. It seems to be based heavily on the anime, with screenshots showing Ash and Pikachu and Professor Oak talking about the game. They even made a joke about Brock being in a maid's outfit, bit odd that. Apparently all the characters from the show are in it and you can hear them speak, which is a bonus. The reviewer reckons it looks just like the TV show with the animation and speech, and it really gets you in the mood for some Pokemon puzzling. Down at the bottom is the info burst box, giving you the details: 128 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, needs a controller pack, cartridge save is in but no Rumble expansion or transfer packs. It was out now in the US, Desi for us Brits, and TBA for Japan, a bit backwards there. Cost is $50, roughly 35 quid. Sounds like a decent puzzle game for the Pokemon crowd, if you're into that sort of thing. This page is all about Pokemon Puzzle League, and blimey, we were all waiting for this one back then, weren't we? It's pitched as Pikachu and Tetris Attack having a bit of a Barney, which is a decent way of putting it. Seems like the chaps at Nintendo's US team, who did Ridge Racer 64 of all things, are behind this puzzle game, and it's based on some of those classic SNES puzzlers, Panel de Pon I reckon they mean. They are making a big deal about Pikachu being the star, obviously. Worse. There's a bit about making your own puzzles at something called Puzzle University. You can pick backgrounds, scatter colored tiles, all that jazz, to create your own brain teasers. Apparently their attempt at making an N64 logo puzzle didn't go too well. Bit of a collapse. Typical. There are a few screenshots dotted around showing the puzzle action, some characters like Erika and Ash in the game, and some different stages. They even point out a quadruple chain garbage block being a rare sight, which sounds impressive if you're into that sort of thing. And it mentions a Puzzle University problem, number 12, which is apparently starting to hurt their brains. Sounds about right for a puzzle game, doesn't it? There's a little tip about tapping R for more blocks, handy to know. All in all, looks like a solid puzzle game for the N64, could be a decent time sink. This page is all about Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64, seems to be a bit of a how to play guide. They've titled it Puzzled Out. Right at the top it's walking you through the basics, step by step, with little screenshots. First up you choose your Pokemon trainer. Apparently it doesn't matter who you pick, but they suggest Pikachu if you're struggling for ideas. Cheers for that tip. Then it explains the core move, matching 3 or more tiles to make them vanish. Pretty standard puzzle fare in it. They go into detail about making fivers by slotting a tile between 2 pairs. Number 4 points out the garbage block mechanic, which is a right pain when it drops on your side. Then they talk about linking lines of tiles next to big bricks to convert them and create combos, and how to really mess with your opponent by linking grey lightning blocks that dumps a massive garbage block on them. Charming, Kyusi. The article itself is quite enthusiastic about the game, saying it's like Tetris Attack but with a Pokemon skin, which is fair enough. They even admit they prefer the original Tetris Attack blocks but were chuffed to find an option to change back to them in this Pokemon version. Bit cheeky but honest. Kia. Down at the bottom they've got Jesse and James from Team Rocket looming over everything, looking menacing as usual. There are a couple of little bits of text at the bottom mentioning Pokemon being knocked out 1v1 in versus matches, and that Team Rocket are preparing for trouble. Well, duh. And a note saying they reached stage 7 in 15 minutes on easy mode, adding, but that was on the cowardly easy mode. Bit of a dig, but they're probably just trying to sound hard. Overall, it's pushing Pokemon Puzzle League as a frantic, chaotic puzzler, which, to be fair, it kind of is. This page is a review of Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64. It's got a big picture of Eevee smack bang in the middle, bless it, and the usual screenshots dotted around showing off the gameplay. They're saying it's like Tetris but with Pokemon, which, yeah, pretty much nails it. In the pluses and minuses bit, they reckon it's perfect puzzling, typical Nintendo quality controls, and packed with Pokemon stuff, which you'd expect, but they're moaning about no 4-player mode. Bit harsh, 2-player is usually enough chaos in my book. If you're into the new Tetris, they suggest you'll like this, and they give the new Tetris a decent score back in issue 33, 88%, saying it's the only non-Game Boy Tetris worth bothering with. Bit strong that, but each to their own. Visually they mention Pikachu, Meowth, Togepi, Marill are all there, looking like they do on the telly. Sounds are apparently soothing renditions of the TV and movie soundtracks, which is fine, nothing to write home about. They're saying it's got mastery, like SNES puzzle games from '92, and lifespan is good with lots of solo modes, making it a compulsive 2-player game. The verdict bit calls it a cynical cash-in from Nintendo but then says it's a flawless puzzler overflowing with lovable Pokemon. Bit contradictory, innit? They give it a solid 89%, a Star Game Award, so they clearly enjoyed it despite their cynicism. Down below they've got Man or Electric Mouse, breaking down the different game modes. Easy. Mimic Mansion is with Tracy and Marill, a super easy version of the 2D puzzle mode, good for messing about with combos. Hard. Spa Service is Team Rocket's evil scheme, about clearing blocks above a line, combo heavy again. Then there's Evil, Puzzle University, for hardcore puzzlers, with loads of puzzles and limited moves. They even joked about skipping Puzzle 21 after an hour of trying. Some of these puzzle games can get properly brain-bending. There are captions under the screenshots like, Brock's line of heart tiles means garbage for us, and beat Tracy to get your hands on Marill from gold/silver. Classic N64 mag captions really. Another one mentions 3D mode being hard, and Team Rocket being like Vikings naturally. And another about James from Team Rocket's cross-dressing being in full effect. Right then, Pokemon Puzzle League. Another one to add to the pile. This page features a review of Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness for the N64. Right then, Miss Pac-Man's girlfriend gets a makeover for her 19th. Blimey, time flies. Apparently Namco thought it was a good idea to drag 5 ancient games, kicking and screaming, into the 3rd dimension. The review is titled, Pack It In, and it doesn't sound too thrilled to be honest. They were hoping to actually control Blinky, Pinky, Inky and Clyde in a multiplayer version of Pac-Man, you know, be the ghosts for a change, which sounds like a laugh. But apparently, the multiplayer is a bit rubbish because the chasers are twice as fast as everyone else. Typical. Yeah. The reviewer reckons Namco have made a right pig's ear of bringing Ms. Pac-Man into 3D. They complain about the blurry visuals and the 3/4 perspective, saying it makes it hard to see what's going on. They've even mentioned the original Pac-Man theme tune is in there. For better or worse, I suppose. There's a little info burst table giving the details on the game. It's a 128 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, needs 8 pages on the controller pack. Password save and expansion pack are a no-go, Rumble pack is a yes, and transfer pack is a no. It was due out in November, in the US and TBA for the UK and Japan, costing about $50 or 35 quid. The review does say there's a refreshing simplicity to it that reminds you of the good old days, with tears running down your cheeks apparently. A bit strong, isn't it? It mentions the levels are a mix of top-down classic screens and more puzzly 3D areas, with bounce pads and blocks you can push. They say it's not exactly original, but getting stuck on a puzzle is rare. Maze Madness apparently. This page is a review spread titled Pack and Forth, all about Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness on the N64. It's laid out as a Ms. Pac-Man experience in 6 easy steps. They're highlighting the classic dot-munching mazes, the power pills in corners for gobbling up ghosts. Petrified nasties as they put it. Apparently there are bits of fruit hidden away for bonus lives, which is always welcome in a Pac-Man game. Then it mentions these green caterpillar enemies and buzzsaws that catapult Ms. Pac-Man around. Sounds a bit more elaborate than the original arcade game. The last point is about doors that you open by eating enough pills, adding a bit of puzzle element to the maze navigation. The pluses and minuses box reckons it's pleasingly puzzly, and the dot munching concept still works. Which yeah, it kinda always does, doesn't it? They also mention full retro coin-op included, suggesting it's got that classic arcade feel, which is what you'd expect. On the downside they say, not for folk obsessed with looks, which, looking at Ms. Pac-Man with lipstick and eyelashes, I can see their point, she is a bit different. Questionable longevity and abysmal multiplayer are also flagged as negatives, which for a single-player focused puzzle game in 2000 isn't the end of the world really. There's an if you like this bit pointing to Lode Runner 3D, saying it's an 80s game given a modern polish, and referencing their previous review where it got 70%. They've given Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness scores of 7 for visuals and sounds, a 5 for mastery, and a 7 for lifespan. The verdict is pretty positive, calling it perfect tonic if you're after simple, enjoyable retro-based fun, and giving it a 72% overall. They're basically saying it's a decent update of Pac-Man, nothing groundbreaking but a solid nostalgic throwback. Bit harsh on Ms. Pac-Man's new look though, she's just trying to keep up with the times, innit? This page is the Club 64 section, your regular dose of N64 info. It's all about getting the most out of your Nintendo 64, and this month's top guide is for Turok 3. Looks like they're giving tips for multiplayer, reckon they're saying it's tricky to beat your mates at it. Turok 3, Rage Wars, was alright, a bit dark and gritty for Turok, wasn't as colourful as the first one, but still shooting dinosaurs, can't complain. There's the usual mailbox section, seeing some readers' handiwork, whatever that is. Then, new tips extra for the top 10 best-selling games, always good for a cheeky cheat or two. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, sounds like some agony aunt for your gaming problems, curing ailments no less, bit dramatic. Game On is about new ways to play old games, could be interesting if you're bored of your usual stuff. I'm the Best is about online leaderboards, see who's top of the pile, though back then it was mostly showing off your scores to your mates in the playground. Millennium Skill sounds a bit futuristic for the year 2000, doesn't it? Is about showing off who's the best N64 gamer. Directory for buying games, check here first they say, probably a price guide or something. And then back issues and subscriptions if you missed any or want to sign up. And right at the bottom, the N64 logo with a page number, page 67. There's even that little globe fella with the trainers on, bit of a mascot. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section, where readers have been writing in. The star letter this month is from someone who's a big fan of Perfect Dark and has made their own Dr. Carol out of sticky back paper and a cornflakes packet. Bit resourceful that. They're hoping Rare might let them use the official textures to make a better version. Ambitious work. Then we've got funny remarks about Perfect Dark again. This time someone spotted a funny voice line in the Carrington Villa level. Someone is debating who the hottest babe on the N64 is, Joanna Dark or Misato Katsuragi from Neon Genesis Evangelion. A bit of anime creeping in there. The editor reckons Rare would have stapled Will Overton's mouth shut if he started on about that sort of thing at work. Probably right. The correction corner is, as usual, full of people picking up on mistakes. Someone spotted a joke about Nintendo having a base in Cuba and wants to know what that's about. Someone else is moaning about the Mario Tennis queue times. Probably a bit of a laugh though. There's a correction about Aiden Chronicles apparently. Some screenshots look like THQ's Holy Magic Century, which they weren't happy about, and they clarified Konami, not THQ published HMC. They also got Luis Figo's nationality wrong in the O'Leary Manager 2000 review, calling him Spanish when he's Portuguese. Bit of a football blunder. Finally, someone is correcting the name of a Pokemon in Pokemon Stadium 3. They called Who. How. They're saying it's Who and it's a legendary bird. They're drawing a line under Pokemon name corrections now. Probably for the best. Best. You. Crying Buckets is about Nintendo World merging with Nintendo N64 Magazine. Apparently people are worried about losing bits of the mag, but they're squeezing everything in. And lastly, In Italy, is from someone who found a Super Mario chocolate egg in Italy, similar to a Kinder Egg, with a plastic car toy inside. Not exactly thrilling. Teenager-shaped holder not included, the editor quips. Fair enough. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section, where readers have been sending in their thoughts. First up, Jonathan Croft from Cumbria is asking about Turok and whether Acclaim had permission to copy the comic for the game. Well, Ed's confirmed that Acclaim actually produced the Valiant comics, so they had the rights all along. Simple as that, really. Then there's David De Cruz from Stoke-on-Trent, who spotted something familiar between the cover of the old Atari 2600 game Crystal Castles and Banjo-Kazooie. He's noticed the bear and witch look a bit similar, and yeah, you can see it. Ed's having a bit of a laugh, suggesting Rare got caught out. It's just inspiration, probably. Or maybe just coincidence, who knows back then. Ford Arnold from Lurgan wrote in about Perfect Dark, noticing the resemblance between a handgun advertised in Airgun World and the CMP 150 in the game. Apparently the switch on the barrel even controls the ammo type in the game, just like the real thing changes from pellets to darts. Funny that. Warrington Duke. Another reader spotted that the Steyr TMP 9mm tactical machine pistol looks very similar to a gun in Perfect Dark as well, although the game version has an auto-lock-on feature that the real one sadly lacks. Maybe Rare were taking notes from real-world weapons for Perfect Dark. Wouldn't be surprised. Moving on to the Dream On section, Stephen Martin via email suggests a Big Brother N64 game, based on the hit TV show, where you create a character, make mates, and try to win some cash. Ed mentions there's already a PC version by some French mob called Infogrames, where you can play as characters from the show and even do mini-games like catching flying cutlery, although chicken catching would have been better, he reckons. Sounds a bit rubbish if you ask me, and he doubts it'll be on the N64 anyway. Shame. Not really. Lastly, Daniel Woods from Manchester pitched a Dragon Ball Z 64 game, a beat-em-up RPG, where you can go Super Saiyan and batter villains like Frieza, Cell, and Majin Buu. Ed seems to like the idea, saying Namek warriors reaching Super Saiyan levels would be good, but jokes they'd need to get Will back on board if that ever happened. Don't hold your breath for that one, mate. This page of N64 Magazine, it's the good old mailbox section, bonus letters and So Tell Me This. Always a laugh to see what the readers were on about back then. Kicking off with Neil Butler moaning about some game being a torturous monstrosity, and suggesting cybernetic arms as compensation. Ed just dryly replies, yes. Classic. Then there's Ben Poor suggesting Will at Rare needs to do some actual work for a change, and Ed's right on board calling him a lazy fool. Ha. Aaron Cronin wants Turok 3, bundled with a magic black pen, to cover up sticky tape marks on the magazine. A bit random, but Ed says, you're probably right. Someone else, Tom Campbell, suggests nuking the office, which understandably gets a, we could get into trouble, from Ed. Health and safety, eh? Tom Granville reckons someone needs a quack, whatever that means, and Ed's just confused, replying, no? Ed. Fergus Alma Scrutton has dropped games in dirt, and Ed wisely suggests keeping them in the bedroom. Good advice for any serious gamer, mind you. Andrew Gordon was apparently shaking like a leaf at the end of Diaz in, presumably, Perfect Dark. Bit dramatic, mate. Ed just says you poor thing. Barry Bracken is after Jonathan Davies, and Ed reckons he's just wandering around London somewhere. Sean Knight claims to have a date with Yoda, and Ed is suitably jealous. Lucky old you. Finally, Tom Winfield is worried about something vague, and Ed's, that's a relief, is equally vague but reassuring. Then there's James Cook, who sent in a Master Craftwork Game Boy holder, and wants tennis or Mario Golf as a reward, but forgot to include his address. Silly sausage. Ed praises the holder, especially the hair department, must be a character holder, and says they can't send a game but will send a badge if he gives his address. There's a weird little bit about Finland, where Jan Kaitila is a dinosaur hunter who moved to Finland and set up a business. Random. Something about a quality cat and Turok's kitten agency. What even is that? Wara. Moving on to Master Craftwork, it's about the Game Boy holder again. Ed elaborates, saying it fits Game Boy snugly and hopes the reader could have Mario, likely referring to Mario Tennis or Mario Golf. The So Tell Me This section starts with a question about WWF No Mercy, asking about table matches, commentary, and backstage areas. Ed confirms no proper table matches, but you can smash opponents through tables. Apparently backstage is for fisticuff purposes. Charming. Next, someone asks if Nintendo will buy Harry Potter rights for GameCube games. Ed sets the record straight. EA got the Harry Potter license and will have to wait for GameCube and Game Boy Advance Harry Potter titles. Rebecca Mason wants to know about Disney games on the N64. Ed says there are a couple actually, mentioning Donald Duck, Quack Attack from Ubisoft coming in November, and Rare's Mickey Speedway USA for Christmas. Then lists other Disney Game Boy games: Aladdin, Jungle Book, Disney's Dinosaur, Donald Duck, and Little Mermaid 2, Pinball Frenzy. Loads of Disney on the Game Boy then, wasn't there? Sue. Then Lau wants to know about the Game Boy Balloon Kid and the order of Rare games. Ed says an IDOS Game Boy shoot 'em up is due in December, a glorious Technicolor version of Balloon Kid is already out in Japan but unsure if it'll come to the UK. For Rare Games, it's Mickey Speedway USA, Banjo-Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day and Dinosaur Planet, but Ed adds, all subject to change mind you. Always was with Rare, wasn't it? Warren 2. Matthew Ragg is asking about Majora's Mask and SNES games after the N64. Ed clarifies that Majora in Majora's Mask isn't actually called Majora, and that the reveal is coming in the English version review next month. For SNES, Nintendo was still churning out SNES titles, but third-party developers would probably focus on the GameCube. Makes sense. Trucare. Finally, the address for query is, so tell me this, N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12BW. If anyone wants to send a letter back in time, that's where to send it. This page is all about how to dominate in Turok 3 multiplayer. Right then, it's got a massive picture of that T-Rex looking chap from Turok, you know, all teeth and dribble. Apparently, this Geraint Evans fella is going to show us how to become the monarch of multiplayer mayhem. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? They've got a What We Said box, quoting their review from issue 46 of Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Seems they thought it was a bit of a mixed bag, some good bits, some bad bits, and definitely not as good as Perfect Dark. Well, Perfect Dark was a tough act to follow, wasn't it? They gave it an 82%, which is a decent score back then, I suppose. So yeah, Turok 3 multiplayer, that's the focus here. This page is all about multiplayer mayhem in Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, specifically the top 10 arenas according to N64 Magazine. They've ranked them from 10 to 1, starting with Teardrop at number 10, which they say is good for Last Man Standing. Then there's Humper, which is apparently good for Capture the Flag, followed by ICU for Monkey Tag, and Perfect Circle for Arsenal of War. Further up the list is Springboard, also for Monkey Tag, Jump for It for Color Tag, Basing for Capture the Flag, and Shipping and Receiving for Golden Arrow. Second place is Catwalks for Weapons Master, and taking the top spot, the number 1 arena, is Watervator for Bloodlust. Watervator, eh? Bit of a strange name, but they reckon it's brilliant, so fair enough. Hacker. They've also got a section on character selection in multiplayer. Apparently in Turok 3, unlike the previous games, the character you pick in Oblivion doesn't really change the gameplay that much, it's mostly just about the weapons they come with. They've given profiles for 3 characters, Danielle, Joseph, and Joshua. Danielle's got a tech bow, Mag 60, Firestorm Cannon, Fireswarm, and an RPG, with a weapon rating of 20. Joseph's rocking a Storm Bow, Silence Pistol, Sniper Rifle, Shredder, and Napalm Cannon, weapon rating 18. And finally, Joshua has a Storm Bow, Silence Pistol, Sniper Rifle, RPG, and a weapon rating of 17. Weapon ratings seems a bit arbitrary if you ask me, but hey, it's their magazine. They're just trying to give you a sense of how powerful each character is, I suppose. Overall, seems like a decent rundown of the best places to blast your mates in Turok 3. This page of N64 Magazine, this is a classic bit of weapon guide for Boomstick Bounty. Looks like we're diving deep into the arsenal you can get your hands on. They've got the spear, which they reckon is a bit rubbish, saying nobody's going to stand around long enough for you to get a good hit in with it. Then there's the bow, described as a trusty weapon, but slow firing, good for headshots apparently. Next up is the tech bow. Now that sounds more like it. More like it, they say. Still slow, but explosive heads, much better for everyday carnage creation, as they put it. Bit violent for a kid's mag maybe. The storm bow is the quick-firing version, apparently better than the bog-standard bow, and good for littering the arena floor with arrows. The standard pistol is next. Unsurprisingly weak, they say, only good if you really have to. The silence pistol is a bit more powerful, but still pointless according to the reviewer. They reckon you'll be blown to bits before you get much use out of it. Moving on to the Mag 60, now that's more like it. They say it's got some power for close encounters, especially if you aim for the chest and use bursts. The assault rifle fires 3-round bursts, okay at close range, but loses its punch further away. Finally, the Firestorm Cannon, judged as weak initially, but it unleashes ammo constantly, perfect for double kills if you catch a couple of enemies close together. They're really pushing the violence, aren't they? It's all a bit tongue-in-cheek though, I suppose. Weapon ratings and stats are included for each. Typical guide stuff, nothing too surprising for the time. This page is all about giving you the edge in Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, breaking down all the lovely weapons you can get your hands on. It's a proper weapon guide this, not just a quick look. Warring Tisha. Starting off with the sniper rifle, they reckon it's a bit pants, close range, slow reload and all that, but in sniper mode it packs a punch. The shotgun, classic, for getting up close and personal, they say it's better than the Fireswarm at close range. Speaking of the Fireswarm, they're not overly impressed. Reckon it's weaker than you'd think for an upgrade, suggesting maybe sticking with the shotgun. Bit harsh maybe? Moving on to the Shredder, now this is more like it, an upgrade they actually rate, good for taking out multiple enemies. Then there's the Vampire, bit of an odd one, uses your health as ammo so maybe not ideal if you're already getting your backside kicked. Grenade Launcher, explosives are always a laugh, they say it's powerful if you can land a direct hit, otherwise not so much. The RPG, they call it powerful and effective, especially if you catch someone in the blast radius, sounds about right for an RPG. Napalm Cannon, oh yes, sticky explosives good for blinding enemies and setting traps, they seem to like this one. Finally, the Cerebral Bore, always a favorite, instant death, gruesome but effective. They are really pushing this as the best weapon here. Ooh. Then we've got character loadouts. The Warrior starts with the Storm Bow, Silenced Pistol, Sniper Rifle, Shredder and RPG, rated 19 for weapons. Ancient Tech Bow, Silenced Pistol, Sniper Rifle, Fireswarm Cannon, Napalm Cannon, weapon rating 17. Scientist gets the Storm Bow, Mag 60, Fireswarm Cannon, Shredder, Napalm Cannon, and rated 20, highest of the bunch. Lastly, the Legionnaire, Tech Bow, Mag 60, Sniper Rifle, Fireswarm and RPG, rating 19. So Scientist seems to be the top dog in terms of starting kit apparently. Mag. All in all, it's a good rundown, pretty much what you'd expect for Turok 3 weapons back then. Cerebral Bore, still sounds as nasty as it always did, doesn't it? Good times. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion's multiplayer deathmatch. It's titled, Rule the Roost, which is a bit of a silly phrase, isn't it? Anyway, it's giving you a breakdown of the different game modes in Turok 3, trying to help you emerge victorious. It starts with Bloodlust, which is just your standard deathmatch really. Get the biggest weapon and stomp some ass, as they put it. Charming. Then there's Capture the Flag, pretty self-explanatory, get the flag, return it to your base, that kind of thing. Monkey Tag is next, sounds a bit daft, but it's about tagging the other player with a fast rate of fire weapon. They suggest the Firestorm Cannon for this, which is always a good shout. Arsenal of War is about not rushing in at the start, letting everyone else weaken each other then wade in with the explosives. Sneaky. Weapons Master is about surviving with whatever rubbish weapons you start with, until you can get your hands on the better gear, like the RPG or Cerebral Bore. Good luck with that. Last Stand sounds like it's about hanging back and letting everyone else fight it out before blasting them with explosives. Much like Arsenal of War really. Golden Arrow is a bit of a weird one, slows you down apparently, making it a stay alive without a shooter scenario. You need to learn the health icon locations and strafe around corners to survive. Sounds tedious. Finally there's Color Tag, a team swapping game mode where speed is key and explosives are useful. It mentions loitering around the arena isn't a good idea. Down the left side, it's got weapon ratings for different characters or skins. Magmite is rated 19 and uses weapons like Storm Bow and Firestorm Cannon. Lost One, also rated 19, uses Tech Bow and RPG. Infestoid is rated 20 and uses Storm Bow and Napalm Cannon. Slave is rated 19 with Tech Bow and Firestorm Cannon. So fairly similar weapon loadouts across the board, just slightly different combinations and ratings I suppose. It's all pretty standard deathmatch fare for the time. Turok 3 was pretty fast paced and had a good selection of weapons, so the multiplayer was decent enough. This page is all about cheating your way through Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Right then, who hasn't looked up a cheat code or two back in the day? It's got a list of animal combinations you need to enter in the Enter Secret screen to unlock various cheats. Level warps, big heads, tiny mode. All the usual suspects. Remember trying to guess these animal combos yourself? Total waste of time, but we all did it. It lists cheats like level 1 foot being frog, elk, horse, dragonfly, wolf, rabbit. There's a load of these for different effects, big hands and feet, headless, all sorts. They're calling it relieving pent-up aggression, which is a bit much, isn't it? It's just cheats, lads. Bahaks. Bahaks. There's also a bit about choosing your character, saying SWAT is decent with his storm bow and sniper rifle, mentioning his weapon rating is 17. They reckon Joseph is a bit rubbish though, saying his weapons are unimpressive and he's too short. Bit harsh on Joseph, maybe he's got other qualities. There are a few screenshots of Turok 3 dotted around, showing off the moody lighting and dinosaur action you'd expect. And a massive picture of a T-Rex jaw, very menacing, as you'd expect from Turok. Good times, blasting through that game. This page is all about tips for top N64 games, proper old school advice this is. Warrington Youthful. First up, Pokemon Snap. They're telling you how to snap Mew, that elusive little blighter. You gotta pelt him with pester balls to get him out of his bubble. Cheeky, but effective. And a tip for Dugtrio in the tunnel, 6 Diglets in a row for access, who knew? Simpler times, just taking photos of Pokemon, no battling nonsense. Gorindu. Next, Perfect Dark, proper grown-up game. This was compared to Pokemon. Get the Phoenix Gun by blowing up pillars, sounds like a blast. And how to kill the Skadar King Phoenix Gun again, and shoot the shrine to drain his shield. Slow the Slayer advice is there too, holding R, A or B to slow rockets, useful for those frantic moments. Pokemon Stadium's up next, and the advice is, win battles. Groundbreaking stuff, use your own Pokemon they say, stronger than rentals, makes sense doesn't it? And ditch the weaklings, brutal but true. Make it tougher. Section suggests beating Who's the Best, minigames on hard 5 times to unlock another difficulty. Always chasing that extra challenge, weren't we? Lastly, Mario Party 2. Extra stars tip, don't despair if Toad nicked all the stars. Collected the most coins. Landed on the most green happening spaces. All ways to get bonus stars at the end. And pay the patrol. Sniff It Patrol in Spaceland can send you back to start, ouch. Mario Party 2, still a classic for ruining friendships. So there you have it, tips for 4 top N64 games. A real mixed bag there for everyone. Pokemon for the young'uns, Perfect Dark for the older crowd, and Mario Party for multiplayer madness. Good times. This page of Club 64 Tips Extra kicks off with ISS 2000, a good old footy game. Apparently, for easy penalty scores you just hoof it right up at the ball home. Simple as that really, though I remember panicking in those penalty shootouts back in the day. Never as easy as they made out. Next up it's Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Now that was a decent shooter. They've got some cheat codes here. Unlimited ammo is fish, elk, bull, snake, eagle, fish, which is a bit of a mouthful. Invincibility is raven, fish, eagle, bear, lizard, rabbit. All keys is lizard, dragonfly, bull, bear, wolf, eagle. Pen and ink mode, which I guess is like a wireframe view, is panther, horse, elk, fish, panther, hawk. And finally, all weapons is owl, bear, owl, insect, hawk, owl. Bit of a zoo going on there for cheat codes, isn't it? Wire. Then we're on to Rugrats, Treasure Hunt. Didn't play this one myself, but it was popular with the younger crowd, I reckon. To get a secret password menu, you gotta do some button gymnastics at the title screen. Hold Xi and press R, then A, and then on the password screen type in Xi, A, B, R, and L. Sounds like a right faff. There's also a tip about Angelica's temple, something about safety in numbers with baby squares. Rayman 2. The Great Escape is next. Classic game. That. To get 100%, apparently it's not about finding every last lum. They say there's a sneaky way in the Tomb of the Ancients. Flip a switch in the cemetery, go back to the hall, climb up the web, be careful not to fall, and then jump in the skull's left eye hole for the final lum. Bit of a bizarre process, but whatever works to get that sweet 100%, eh? Call. Michael Owen's World League Soccer gets a mention. Solid defense is the key apparently, putting 5 men at the back. For attack they say take the ball to the byline and cross it in. Standard football tactics really, even in video game form. They mention using the analog stick for aftertouch, which was pretty advanced stuff back then. Praise. Then it's back to Turok with Rage Wars. Easy cheats they call it. You create a character, rack up 500 kills, save it, and then copy that character to the other 3 slots. Load them all up, and apparently your combined kill total becomes a miraculous 2000, unlocking all cheats. Sounds a bit convoluted, but if you were desperate for cheats, I guess you'd do it. Finally, a tip for the top, for duck dodgers. Animal Sounds is a little bonus feature. On Planet X, transformation zap level, become an animal, and press B to hear your animal sound. Lovely stuff. And a second sweep tip, don't stress about collecting every atom in one go, you can come back later when you've completed the game. Good advice to be fair, some of those games were proper completionist traps. This page is all about reader tips, top 15 of them no less, for the N64. Right at the top, it's the cheat of the month, for Zelda Ocarina of Time. Apparently, there's a trick to getting all the gold sculptures in the castle. You need to go where Talon sleeps, bomb the tree, drop down the hole, get the token, but don't pick it up, use the teleporter and boomerang trick, and then repeat. Sounds a bit fiddly, but anything for those skull tokens, eh? Tony Cat from Kent sent that one in. Borrentindle. Tip number 2 is for DK64, suggesting if you're running low on melons and have a tag barrel handy, you can hop in and out as the same character to refill your health. Jack Warren from Leicestershire is the brains behind that. Rookie. Next up, Castlevania 64. In the villa level, you can set fire to the chandelier at the top of the stairs to get a Purify, Cure Ampoule, 500 gold, and a red gem. Nice little bonus from Lance Percy in Northampton. Tip 4 is another perfect dark one. In the G5 building, leave your Camzy just outside the conspirators' meeting room and run to the safe. After the decoder bit, switch back to Camzy, guide it in, and apparently you can watch the conspirators, which will help with the counter. James McDermott from Australia sent that one in. Where you focus. Tip 5 is more perfect dark. Trouble with cloaked sims? Get yourself a CMP 150 and use the secondary function to spot them uncloaking, then lock on and wipe them out. Anon from Nowheresville with that sneaky tactic. Use the SPO. Another perfect dark tip, number 6. If a level is too difficult, try it in counter-operative mode and play as a guard. Wander about, don't kill the other guards, and once you've cleared a few enemies, switch back to Joe and it should be easier. Stephen Cox from Dublin reckons that works. Tip 7, guess what? Perfect dark again. Select multiplayer. Load your own character into a 2-player game. Set Farsight as the only weapon. Kill limit to 1. And go for headshots on the idle second player to get all 4 stars for headshots, kills, master, accuracy and survivor. Piers Dylan Scott from Dublin with that one. Tip 8. And yes, another perfect dark tip. To wind up N64 Magazine staff, write a variation of the keeping the firing range door open trick and send it in 250 times a week. Include a picture for maximum points. Geraint Evans from Bath with the humorous suggestion. Number 9 is for Super Smash Bros. If you get beat in multiplayer, you can borrow a life from a teammate. Hold A plus B plus Z plus. Start to get back in the action. Matt Swales from Australia shared that one. Riage. Tip 10 is WrestleMania 2000. If you're struggling in Road to WrestleMania, climb onto the panel directly behind the ring as soon as the match starts. Your opponent will run towards you, so switch over to the panel nearest to you, and your opponent will continue to run into the panel until you're on special. Spin the analog stick until you're out of the cage, and you'll leave your opponent totally confused. Peter Tippett from Cornwall, with that cagey tactic. Number 11 is Vigilante 8. On the snow level, make your way to the hut at the bottom of the lift and shoot open the door. Accelerate into the cabin, you'll find that you're riding the lift and can pick up weapons while on it. Chris Staines from Cumbria with that one. Warranty 8. Tip 12 is another Vigilante 8. Enter living_forever as a passcode for invincibility and fire _NO_ limits for quick firing weapons. Chris Staines from Essex again, seems he loves Vigilante 8. Tip 13 is yet another perfect dark tip. Are you surprised? Set all weapons to remote mines in multiplayer, and the Sims can't detonate them, allowing you to beat entire teams of perfect Sims. Mark Smith from Hemel Hempstead with that one. Tip 14. Banjo-Kazooie this time. Head to the sandcastle on Treasure Trove Cove and enter the code BRLEUDYFEAEGTHEGS on the floor to get your egg filled up to 200. Nicely. David Drabble from Derbyshire with that helpful code. Finally, tip 15, F1 World Grand Prix. Hold the analog stick up at the start of a race, and you'll accelerate quickly and gain about 6 places. Rory McGovern from Dublin rounding things off. Below the tips is a form to send in your own tips for game name, and I've found that if you, and space for name, address and postcode. It also mentions sending to Tips Extra, N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12, BW-. You get a pin badge if your tip is used as cheat of the month. All good stuff for the N64 gamer, back in the day. This page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. It's the place you wrote into back in the day when you were properly stuck on a game and needed a nudge in the right direction. Looks like Simon Murphy from Northern Ireland is having trouble with Legion, the final boss in Shadowman. Dr. Kits is telling him that Violator ammo alone won't cut it, you need to nick Legion's soul and lay on the firepower. He's suggesting using one Violator and another weapon together, and when Legion is knackered, go for the Soul Snatch. Apparently, this works for both his human and monster forms, and it's supposed to be a piece of cake then. Next up, Alex Crowley from Ickenham wants to know about unlocking the Naboo fighter in Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Remember that one? Dr. Kits gives a bit of a cryptic clue about Naboo and Italian singing. Very odd. Turns out you need to use Halifax as a password. Then when you get to the code screen, bash in IYNGWIE. And Bob's your uncle, the Naboo fighter is chilling next to your X-Wing. Sneaky. Reggae. Then there's Duncan Smith from Surrey, wondering where Marvin, Terence, and Philip are in South Park Rally. Dr. Kits says Terence and Philip are easy to spot if you just follow the pointers. which sounds about right for that game. To get them, you need to play as Cartman, dressed as the lard-starved Ethiopian charming, wasn't it? And lose Thanksgiving, whatever that means, then escape to the barn. To get the flatulent duo, you have to find 4 golden cows in the Christmas race. He even gives the locations: behind a house, in a ditch, and near checkpoints. And for Chef, or the Wiener as they call him, you've got to only cross checkpoints 1 and 4 in Rally Days 2. Complicated for South Park Rally, wasn't it? Lee House from Great Yarmouth is struggling with Donkey Kong 64, can't find the entrance to Frantic Factory, thinks it's under K. Rool's Island. Dr. Kitts is saying, if you've unlocked Frantic Factory, you've already unlocked DK64, which is a bit of a strange answer. He clarifies the gloomy galleon entrance is under K. Rool's Castle, not too hard to spot on the side of the mechanical castle, opposite the island with the witch face. Right you are, Dr. Kitts. Lastly, Benjamin Wells from East Kilbride is asking about the last character in Super Smash Bros. He's already got Luigi, Jigglypuff and Captain Falcon. Dr. Kitts tells him it's Ness, and he's a right scrappy one apparently. He's also one of the hardest to unlock. You have to complete the game on normal difficulty, with the stack set to 3. Proper effort for Ness, wasn't he? So there you go, another batch of gaming ailments, sorted by Dr. Kitts. This page is an advert, a competition actually, for an HP PC and printer, all bundled up with Pokemon Print Studio software. Right then, they're giving away a Pavilion PC, a DeskJet 840C inkjet printer, and the Pokemon Print Studio CD-ROM. Apparently if you buy this specific Hewlett-Packard printer from late October onwards, you get the Pokemon Print Studio thrown in for free. Makes sense as Christmas is coming up, good timing. The advert is asking you to answer a simple question to win this setup. The question is, which of these is a type of printer? And the options are Jumbojet, Inkjet, or George Jetson. Come on now, even a Zubat could figure out that one. It's obviously Inkjet. They even mention the DeskJet 840C inkjet printer right above it. For the tiebreaker, you need to finish the sentence, I need a new PC and printer in my house because, in under 15 words, probably something about Pokemon, knowing these mags. Or key. Looks like you had to send your entry to Prince Charming at N64 Magazine in Bath, and the closing date was the 24th of November. So, if you were quick off the mark, you might have had a chance. Pokemon Print Studio, eh? Sounds like you could make your own Pokemon stickers, masks, invitations, all that sort of thing, then print them out. Good way to waste some ink, I reckon, but kids would probably love it. A whole £1,350's worth of prizes, they reckon. Fantastic. This page is showcasing some cool player-created game modes for Perfect Dark, which was absolutely the multiplayer king on the N64 back then. They've called it Game On, and it's all about 8 challenges to test the best players. Mimimip. First up is Remote Men. This Davy Smith bloke came up with it. Sounds like a right laugh, planting remote mines on maps like Skadar or Facility, and just setting them off when people clump together. Medals are given out for multiple kills, 8, 4, or 2 at a time. Simple but effective chaos, I can imagine. Then there's Massacre, from some Finnish lads, Juha Pekasari and Ville Lehtinen. This one's for 2 players on Felicity with meat sims, naturally. 10 minutes, meat difficulty, 1-hit kills, sounds intense. Weaponry is pretty mental reapers, proximity mines, laptops, Callistos, remote mines and a phoenix. They're talking serious carnage. Medals for getting massive kill counts, 290, 270, 250. Blimey. Next is Stick in the Mud. Chris Rose and Ben Poor from Derbyshire are behind this. Temple map, weapons are slayers and magnums, 2 to 4 players. Someone fires a remote slayer missile, and the other players have to guide it through this hole in the temple level, and back again. Sounds a bit fiddly, but quite ingenious. Medals are for passes 7+, 46 and 3. Finally, there's Death Row, by Murray Phillipson from Lincoln. Another temple one, using remote mines and sniper rifles. This is like a duck shoot scenario. One player is the duck, and everyone else lines up with sniper rifles and mines. The duck has to run across this big room on temple level with a hole in the middle, while the others try to blow them up. Medals are for widths, 10, 6, and 3 widths. Properly sadistic, but that's Perfect Dark for you. Me. All of these game modes show just how inventive people were getting with Perfect Dark. It wasn't just about the standard modes, it was about creating your own fun. Good times. The next page is all about Club 64 challenges, right? These were a staple back in the day. It's got 4 different games featured here, and it's called 8 challenges to test the best. Bit of a grandiose title, eh? First up, we've got Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as the Yanks call it. This one is Star Fox Hunt, and it's a 2-player battle royal. One player is the hunter, the other is trying to survive. Apparently no weapons, U-turns or somersaults allowed, just basic flying skills. They're scoring it based on minutes survived, and there are gold, silver and bronze medals to be had. David Sermon from Ripon came up with this one apparently. Then there's Resident Evil 2 with a challenge called Line 'em Up. This is for single player as Leon, naturally. You're in the police station, first floor office, and you've got to use the 12-gauge shotgun to, quote, whip out your 12 caliber shotgun and try to line up zombies for some multiple kills. Bit gruesome. But it's Resi 2, innit? Medals are based on how many zombies you waste. Oliver Mulkerins from London is the brains behind this one. Next up, Jet Force Gemini, remember that one? Rare's shooter. This challenge is bear slaughter. It's a target range thing, multiplayer, and you're shooting the teddy bear critters, but you've got to avoid the ants. Tribal targets is the medal score, and Ed Hodson from Farnham is credited for this one. They reckon it's more rewarding than just shooting teddies normally, whatever that means. And finally, GoldenEye 007, of course. Mine Course is the challenge. 2-player facility. Player 1 lays 11 proximity mines in the corridor, and player 2 has to get to the toilet without dying. Deaths are the score for the medals. Peter and Neil Tippett from Cornwall sent this one in. Simple but effective. GoldenEye mines, classic stuff. Down at the bottom it's, now it's your turn. Game on challenges wanted. They're asking for readers to send in their own weird ways to play games, around 100 words. They want challenges for Pokemon Stadium, Mario Tennis, Tony Hawk Skateboarding, and Turok 3 specifically. If they print yours, you get a flashy N64 pin badge. Can't say fairer than that, can you? Send your ideas to Game On, N64 Magazine at their address in Bath. Good times. This page is all about game soundtracks, specifically Nintendo ones of course, and it's asking if Mario and music are a perfect match, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a daft question, isn't it? I mean, everyone knows Nintendo has always been top-notch when it comes to tunes. The article kicks off by saying Nintendo has always understood game music from way back with Donkey Kong, and right up to Majora's Mask with its gloomy clock tower music. It's saying Nintendo's music has been surprisingly good, even pop music good, which is a bit of a stretch, but I get what they mean. They even mention characters like Mario and Donkey Kong being like pop stars and dancing on top of the pops, which is a funny image. They are talking about Richard and Judy too, really dating this magazine, aren't they? Prichon. Then it moves on to game soundtracks, and says Japan is really into Nintendo soundtracks, maybe more than us lot in the UK or over in America. It mentions Zelda, Majora's Mask as being a recent soundtrack release, a double CD no less, with loads of tracks from the game. Apparently full recordings from Ocarina of Time, which they call Sound of Lilat for some reason, Yoshi's Story, and even Super Mario 64, are all available to buy as soundtracks. You can see the covers for the Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time soundtracks next to the text. Brings back memories seeing those box arts. This page is taking a look back at some slightly odd Mario-related stuff from the archives. At the top it's all about the Do the Mario TV theme tune from the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. They're having a bit of a laugh at the lyrics, saying they weren't exactly Shakespeare, but that Lou Albano, bless him, really went for it with the impromptu dance. There are pictures of him on set, doing his thing in a cartoon desert. It's all a bit cheesy, but that's the Super Mario Bros. Super Show for you. Next to that, they've even printed the lyrics, so you can relive the magic. Below that, there's a section called Hyrule Symphony Nintendo. This is talking about a CD of orchestral arrangements from Ocarina of Time, fancy that. Apparently string orchestras doing game music were a bit of a thing in Japan. They mention Ryuichi Katsumata arranged it, and that it's got tunes like Gerudo Valley and Epona's song done in a classical style. They say it's a proper full ensemble, and there's even a message from Shigsy himself in the sleeve notes. There are some tiny pictures of the track listing, and the CD itself, it's got a picture of the ocarina on it, naturally. Finally, at the bottom there's a Pele IT section with ocarina notes. Looks like they're telling you to dust off your ocarina and have a go at playing Zelda 64 and Super Mario Land tunes. Always good to have a bit of a blow on the ocarina if you were that way inclined, and had one lying around of course. This page features a look back at some musical efforts inspired by video games, specifically from Buckner Garcia and Ambassadors of Funk. Remember Pac-Man Fever? Well, these guys, Buckner and Garcia, also did a tune called Do the Donkey Kong. They're interviewed here, explaining how they wrote it after watching people in arcades, and the legal hassle of getting all the rights. Apparently, it took 39 contracts, can you imagine? They even talk about a track called E.T. I Love You, and some rap song they did back in the 80s. Madness. Then there's Ambassadors of Funk, who did Super Mario Land. These lads are also interviewed, chatting about getting permission from Nintendo, which was a bit of a palaver involving a trip to Japan and seeing Shigsy himself. Shigeru Miyamoto. They mention Mark Goodyear from Radio 1 giving it a boost, and even appearing on Richard and Judy. Apparently they didn't do Top of the Pops properly, just used the video with some students dancing in Chessington World of Adventures. Sounds a bit naff, doesn't it? They also mention a Street Fighter 2 song that didn't go anywhere, which is probably for the best. There are track highlights boxes for both songs, pointing out bits like da 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 da. DK climbs the girders for the Donkey Kong tune and welcome and enter the center. The rap begins for Super Mario Land. Right at the bottom there's a PLAIT section showing you how to play the Tetris theme on your ocarina in Zelda 64. Always thought that ocarina was a bit of a gimmick, but fair play I suppose. This page is all about the Canadian band Shine Factory and their single Bring Me Down. It's got that Foo Fighters vibe apparently. They've made a video for it where they're recreating GoldenEye deathmatches, which sounds a bit mental but could be amusing. There's a little interview with the singer/guitarist, Mike Frederick Johnson. He's talking about how they discovered GoldenEye and got hooked on it, especially the temple level, with grenade launchers. He mentions they used actors for the video who weren't familiar with GoldenEye, so they had to get them up to speed quick, firing up the N64 and showing them the ropes. Apparently the reaction to the video online was pretty big, with loads of downloads on some website. They're asked about future video game themes, and they mention they're into Perfect Dark at the moment, saying it's a bit more advanced than GoldenEye, so parodying that will be trickier. Sounds like they're proper N64 fans, which is decent. There's a bit about how the video perfectly recreates the GoldenEye deathmatch bunker level, with characters like Xenia Onatop, Baron Samedi, and Oddjob. They even got the crouching animation right. It's got track highlights listing key moments in the video like Bond, Oddjob, Xenia and Samedi start their game at 2 seconds in, and Shine Factory investigate the GoldenEye room at 2 minutes 19 seconds. Bit specific that. Wariously go. Then there's a competition to win Shine Factory stuff. T-shirts, CDs and a giant toy gun like in the video. To enter you have to answer a question about where the video was filmed. The choices are Mike's bathroom, Toronto, or Chessington World of Adventures. Bit of a random selection there. Huawei. Down below there's a quick review for Tetris Dr. Spin, on the Game Boy Color. Says it's rubbish and was produced by the same team behind Timmy Mallett's Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini Summer Smash. Which is not exactly a ringing endorsement, is it? Apparently it's Tetris with a dance beat and someone doing a dodgy Soviet accent. It did surprisingly well in the charts back in '92 though, reaching number 6. Shows what the public will buy, eh? At the bottom there's a Play It section with the sheet music for a bit of Bring Me Down, and it says to grab Zelda 64 to play along. So all in all, a page plugging this band's Shine Factory and their GoldenEye themed video, with a bit of a game review chucked in and a competition to win some merchandise. Standard magazine fare, really. This page screams, Christmas is coming, doesn't it? Big splash for the Majora's Mask review, right there on the cover. The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask in massive blue letters, can't miss it. They are really pushing the boat out saying, just how good is it? Find out all you need to know, only in N64. Bit cheeky but hey, it's a magazine cover. You've got young Link looking all determined with his sword and shield, ready to take on whatever's thrown at him. There's a screenshot of the game itself, bit blurry but you can see it's the proper 3D Zelda action. And then this slightly odd artwork of some hulking brute, and a smaller fella with a massive hammer. Very colourful. It's certainly eye-catching. Down in the corner, there's a purple N64 controller, and an expansion pack, remember those? Under the PLS logo, promising a roundup of N64 peripherals for a Christmas list guide. Very helpful for parents clueless about what to get their kids. And right at the bottom, in big red letters, the UK's best-selling independent. Because apparently that's something to shout about. Issue 48, in case you were wondering. Good old N64 Magazine, always there to tell you what's what. This page of the magazine, issue 49 it is, takes us to December 2000. Right at the top we've got Tipped for SF Rush 2049. Remember that one? San Francisco Rush but all futuristic and that. They're telling us to locate every shortcut and unlock every arena, standard stuff for these racing games back then. Then, under reviewed, are 3 N64 titles. WWF No Mercy of course, everyone was playing that at the time, wasn't there? Proper wrestling game that one. Then The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game. Bit of a GoldenEye wannabe if you ask me, but still alright for a blast. And lastly Mickey's Speedway USA. For the younger gamers I suppose, colourful kart racer. Below that, even more pics, showcasing Banjo-Tooie, Aiden Chronicles, and Dinosaur Planet. Banjo-Tooie, now that was a massive game, they were really pushing the boat out with the size of those worlds. Aiden Chronicles. Kiwi, trying to be all epic RPG, wasn't it? Bit clunky from what I recall. And Dinosaur Planet, which we know now eventually became Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube. Interesting to see its early N64 days. Kerwe says, and a whole lot more besides. And then, on sale Monday the 20th of November, so you had to wait a bit. Big Nintendo Magazine logo at the bottom there. On the right side, we have bullet points. Skill Club Millennium, the latest results. Those online leaderboards were a big deal back then, showing off your high scores. Tons of new tips and cheats. Essential for getting through some of these tough games without pulling your hair out. The best special investigations. Always wondered what those were actually about. Probably just standard previews and features hyped up a bit. Latest GameCube and GBA news. GameCube was just around the corner, wasn't it? Exciting times for Nintendo. And the GBA, handheld gaming, was really taking off. The only reviews you can trust. Cheeky claim as always. Plus, absolutely free. With a double game guide for 2 top N64 titles. Can't say no to a free guide, especially back then when the internet wasn't quite what it is now. Next month in Planet Game Boys mentioning Game Boy content for the next issue. And then in a yellow box reviewed, Cannon Fodder Donkey Kong Country and Tipped, Perfect Dark Jungle Book, all Game Boy titles, so a bit of a Game Boy focus coming up. N64 logo and number 113 at the bottom right, and December 2000. Yep, that's the page summed up. This page is a bit of a laugh. It's Zelda's Life Stars, a horoscope section but with a Zelda twist. Each star sign is matched with a Zelda character and given a daft prediction. Voyu. Starting with Aries, they've got a sheep and some guff about exploding worms and Armageddon. Bit random, innit? Taurus is represented by a cyber demon from Doom 64, proper blast from the past that game is, and then just gibberish to sound like a monster. They even mention Roxette, showing their age a bit there. Kaya. Gemini's got a pet dog suggestion and something about an undersized miniskirt. Cheeky. Then a Jimmy Savile impression which, looking back now, is a bit creepy. Cancer is Nipper, from Banjo-Kazooie, a great game that was, with a weird nightmare about birds pecking your eyes. Leo is Meowth, which is a bit odd as it's Pokemon not Zelda, and they're calling him a philosopher in the Japanese version. Virgo is Princess Peach for some reason, talking about blocked toilets and plumbers. Very down to earth for a princess, eh? Libra is Duke Nukem, hail to the king baby. Classic Duke line. Something about aliens and justice, which is a bit all over the place. Scorpio is a giant scorpion from Wild Wild West, the film, not game, and mentions Duke Nukem 0 Hour, which is clearly a play on Duke Nukem again. Gumbedecked bouncers? Madness. Warrington Nuss? Sagittarius is Link, finally a proper Zelda character. They're on about stars getting bigger and evil twin robotic versions, proper sci-fi nonsense. Capricorn is a sheep and Flossie. From Space Station's Silicon Valley. Another N64 game, that one. Bit of a quirky title that. Something about crashing a robot. And Roger the dog. Totally bonkers. Aquarius is Jabu Jabu, and it's all about water and ginger-headed, armor-plated wrongdoers, and fishy princesses. Pisces is Magikarp, and they reckon it's a useless month, and you'll feel like a fish out of water. Haha, very fishy indeed. There's also a Dear Zelda letter from someone in Chicago about a prediction coming true, and they're offering 10 rupees for letters. Overall, it's a bit of light-hearted fun, using Zelda characters to make up silly horoscopes.